So, somebody said something about like arena. You're supposed to do 3 a day. Where does it say that you should do 3 a day? Like it's like. And why? Let's hit 21. So I get the next chest, and then maybe. Because I'm confused by that. I would like to get rid of some of these freaking rings. Kind of like the idea of the crit hit rate line. Just have crit rate. The defense isn't a bad thing. 200 defense, 200 defense, you know? Like survivability. I like the survivability, if I'm being honest. Arena, 3 arena fights per arena. What the fuck are they talking about? Are they talking about like these warlord things? Or some shit? They're not talking about PvP, are they? I don't know. I should just probably just ignore it, but I need to take a piss still, so should get that out of the way. Either way, I'm making fast progress, just winging it. I'm level 20, you know? Like, it's not like I'm playing a rush game or anything. And I'm still progressing really nicely. Alright, I'm gonna take a piss, and then we'll keep going.
president insisted that soon we will see a change in the infection rates.
When America is faced with a challenge, we come through, and we always come through to every obstacle, and I think you'll be seeing that over the next few months. The numbers skyrocket downward.
Yes.
Skyrocket
Classic symbol
downward.
of success. A rocket in the sky, plummeting toward the ground. Like they say, shoot for the moon. If you miss, you will die alone in a frozen metal tube. The president took a few questions, and one reporter wondered why the White House was playing by different rules than the rest of the country.
Officials here in this room have encouraged Americans not to travel this holiday season, not to go to large gatherings. Across the street, you've been holding holiday parties with hundreds of people, many not wearing masks. Why are you modeling a different behavior to the American people than what you're trying to do?
the Christmas parties.
What kind of parties it is doesn't matter, unless you put so much rum in your eggnog that it's antiseptic. And forget hospitals and nursing homes. The place that needs the vaccine first is the White House, because yet another member of the president's legal team just tested positive for COVID. Attorney and woman demanding the Chipotle guy to pick the cilantro out of the rice. Jenna Ellis. Now, there's no way to know exactly where Ellis was exposed to a noxious cloud of pathogens, but it was definitely this.
The answer that I gave you is they didn't bother to interview a single witness.
Okay. That's two reasons to wear a mask around Rudy. Of course, it wouldn't be a White House COVID diagnosis if it didn't endanger others. Because on Friday, Ellis attended a senior staff Christmas party and was not seen wearing a mask. Well, at least she brought something for the Secret Santa. Although this is the White House, so that's a re-gift. Just because all the lawyers are sick doesn't mean the campaign is stopped losing. I'll tell you the blow by blow of how much they blow in tonight's.
I won.
The road from the White House.
Despite losing 51 post-election lawsuits, the president was still holding on hope for the Supreme Court. At his vaccine summit today, he said this.
Now let's see whether or not somebody has the courage, whether it's a legislator or legislatures, or whether it's a justice of the Supreme Court or a number of justices of the Supreme Court. Let's see if they have the courage to do what everybody in this country knows is right.
You mean drag you out of the White House by your ankles? Where do we sign up? But just like each of his wives, the president has been repeatedly disappointed. Because just a few hours ago, the Supreme Court rejected a case from Pennsylvania Republicans delivering a near-fatal blow to the GOP's long-shot bid to invalidate President-elect Joe Biden's victory. Wow. Even Trump's hand-picked Supreme Court justices didn't want to hear this nonsense. Brett Kavanaugh, do you have any coping mechanisms that might help the Republicans deal with this near-fatal blow?
I like beer.
It's hard to explain the crazy argument they tried in this case, but here goes. Earlier this year, Pennsylvania's Republican-controlled legislature changed the laws there to allow universal mail-in ballots. But now that they saw that Joe Biden won, Republicans are saying that the Republican legislature never had the power to do that. The solution they were asking for? The court should invalidate all votes cast by mail in the general election, more than 2.5 million in total. So, toss out all the votes after you know what the results are. That's like going to Vegas, not betting until you see your cards, then burning down the casino. Now, there wasn't much to the court ruling, just a short statement that read, the application for injunctive relief presented to Justice Alito and by him referred to the court is denied. Whoa. Justice Samuel Alito, Mr. Citizens United himself, rejected the case? Well, I guess it makes sense. If you start taking constitutional rights away from citizens, what's next? Taking constitutional rights away from corporations? Giovanni needs that gun license. Another state where the president lost his fight against democracy is Arizona, which certified Joe Biden's victory over a week ago. But last night, the Arizona Republican Party retweeted a pro-Trump account that said, I am willing to give my life for this fight, adding in their retweet, he is, are you, Arizonans. The GOP is asking you to give your life to stop a fraud and a stealing of an election, despite the fact that their own lawyers in Arizona court said, we are not alleging fraud, we are not alleging anyone is stealing the election. So don't do it. There are only two good reasons to die in Arizona. Grand Canyon selfie and choking on a turquoise belt buckle. I don't know how it got in your mouth, but I understand. Elsewhere, desperate attempts to steal the election are happening deep in the heart of Texas, led by Texas Attorney General and Tintin going to divorce court, Ken Paxton. Paxton filed a Supreme Court lawsuit against states Biden won, and his argument is as simple as it is stupid. Texas argued that electors from Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin should not be allowed to cast their votes because they changed their voting procedures during the coronavirus pandemic to allow for increased mail-in ballots. In other words, these states' votes shouldn't count because these states let people vote. Everyone should have to vote the way they do in Texas. If you can stay on the bull for 8 seconds, you get to fire a rifle at a tin can displaying your candidate of choice. Winner gets a Confederate sheet cake. It's a flag. It's a flag. On a more disturbing note, you laugh harder when I up than when I get it right. That's not instill confidence. On a disturbing note, yesterday we learned that the president has called the Speaker of the Pennsylvania House of Representatives twice during the past week and asked for help reversing his loss in the state. Come on, man. At a certain point, you have to understand that it is over. There's a reason you don't see headstones that say, I'd like a second opinion. It's horrifying, but at this point, no one should be surprised because the call makes Pennsylvania the third state where the president has directly attempted to overturn a result. Say what you will, but at least the president called. It's so much more personal than destroying democracy by text. You up for fascism? We've got a great show for you tonight. My guests are the hosts of the Slate Political Gabfest, John Dickerson, Emily Bazelon, David Plotz. But when we return, meanwhile, join us, won't you?
I'm going to tell you what is the biggest thing that agency owner gets it wrong. They do not know how to build scalable products. Most marketing agencies end up becoming whatever the customer wants agency. That means, hey, you want a flyer and logos and brochures and posters? We'll do that too. And that's the sad reality why most agencies are just not built scalable. You got to design it to be a growth machine. So in this training that I'm hosting, it's free and it's instant. We talk about how to grow and scale.
Okay. Let's turn that shit off. Need a podcast or something that would entertain my mind. Oh, 1 second here. Maybe I'll just turn on the news or something.
Monster? If I am a monster, what do you consider yourself? Do not take this life for granted.
Heartland in Maryland, Colorado is very beautiful. We went around to Breckenridge, around Dillon, Blue Lake, Wheeler Lake, Crystal Lake. Finally, after an 8-hour day, brave the elements, a little patch of ice, they fought under steam and iced up campus. It ended up being like a blast because this patch that we found was condition. Stand up to moderate to severe rheumatoid arthritis and take it on with Rinvoq. Rinvoq, a once-daily pill, can dramatically improve symptoms. Rinvoq helps tame pain, stiffness, swelling, and for some, Rinvoq can even significantly reduce RA fatigue. That's Rinvoq. With RA for overactive immune system attacks your joints, Rinvoq regulates it to help stop the attack.
Rinvoq can lower your ability to fight infections, including tuberculosis, serious infections and blood clots, sometimes fatal for the bird. Has acute cancers, including lymphoma, and tears in the stomach or intestines, and changes in lymphocytes. Your doctor should monitor your blood work. Tell your doctor about any infections if you are or may become pregnant while taking Rinvoq.
Take on RA. Talk to your rheumatologist about Rinvoq relief. Rinvoq, make it your mission. If you can't afford your medicine, Opti may be able to help.
That is something to behold. If any legislature and build a car you park underwater. But with your borrowing policy work, these car replacements that could be a minor interruption. Yeah, discuss it for that. A whole lot of something with farmers policy work.
New Galaxy Kids. A machine with aluminum exterior. Strong. Has never been so beautiful.
How did things get this bad?
Shout out to the ones turning heads, turning tables, flipping the script, and facing the shout out to the new kids, to the future leaders. Turn it up.
I never thought it would come to this.
The gods will see us through.
Sunchips. Making waves with 100% whole grain mushrooms. From real cheddar cheese to the taste of garden tomatoes and jalapeno peppers to earth seasoned original. Our chips are one of a kind, just like you. Sunchips. Be your own way.
I never thought it would come to this.
Be right back after this commercial break. This whole thing's been a commercial. This is the reason I can't stand to turn on regular TV. It's too much commercials. It's gotten out of hand.
While it may seem icky, most of those microbes aren't our enemies. In fact, we need them to stay healthy.
Inside science.
Everyone develops their own unique mix of microbe species, starting with the ones they are exposed to during birth. Over time, those microbial communities can shift for better or worse. Some change that microbiomes in the mouth because their lifetimes, and we continue to change them to control lifetime bias, for example. The changing nature of our microbiomes may give us a chance to fix things when they go wrong, but it also makes it possible to mess things up. For example, when you take antibiotics.
You need something, citizen? Be vigilant.
Knight describes the changes in one child whose microbiome was tested every week for the first 2.5 years of life.
I never thought it would come to this.
So how can you keep your microbiome healthy besides avoiding antibiotics? The take-home message from this is right now is the list of things you should do, but the list of things you that there is also something you should do, right? So you should eat your vegetables, especially vegetables which are
My goodness. I need a podcast. Can't listen to this shit.
Over the last 12 years, Subaru of America Incorporated and its participating retailers have donated more than $176 million to help those in need through the Subaru Share the Love event. By the end of this, their 13th year, Subaru and the participating retailers they work with will have donated over $200 million to help those in need.
/ Watson Assistant.
Ryan, Evan, Jerry, Robert Redford. This is stuff you should know.
I never saw that movie.
Really?
Yeah, it's just one, I was kind of too young for a legal procedural, I think, and then I just never caught up to it.
Not just a legal procedural, the romance one too.
Yeah, boring.
I saw it a bunch of times when I was younger for some reason. I guess my mom must have been into it or something, and I was just along for the ride.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. But it was good if I remember correctly. But yeah, it was a good, I mean, you can't go wrong with either one of those two,
Wasn't there a third?
Legal Eagles 3, Olympus Has Fallen. I think
was there a third person in that? Wasn't it a romantic triangle, or am I just making that up?
I don't know. I think there's the Last Days of Disco.
I'm looking now. Daryl Hannah's on the cover, so.
Oh yeah, she might have been.
Popped in for a tasteful nude, and she probably was.
She convulses on the floor.
You know she's married to, right?
No.
Neil Young.
I didn't know that. I could totally see that now that you say it, though.
Yeah, they're the reason that Neil Young and David Crosby don't speak to each other.
Why did David Crosby used to like Daryl Hannah?
No, he's just a big jerk, and he said something about her in an interview that wasn't nice, right when they got together.
Jeez,
Neil Young's
problem.
Dead. He's a notorious jerk.
I didn't even know that, but I could kind of see it.
Yeah, he admits it.
That's even worse. I think that's worse. People who are like, I'm just a jerk, deal with it. It's like, no. Why don't you change your personality a little bit to conform a little better to the rest of our expectations, you SOB?
Well, let me rephrase that. And this is all coming from the great documentary about him, recent one. He admits it and has deep regrets over how he's treated.
Oh, well, that's good.
So he's an old man. Yeah, regrets his behavior.
That makes it easier to kick somebody when they're down. If they're like, deal with it, you can't bring them down to your level and kick them.
Yeah.
But if they're like, I really regret everything, you're like, yeah, you should.
Right.
Really rub it in,
He's an old man.
Sure. Exactly. So, obviously today, Chuck, we're talking about class action lawsuits. I think anybody who could read the Stuff You Should Know tea leaves could have discerned that, or they could have just looked at the title of the episode.
Yeah, something that it occurred to me while we were researching this, but many people listening to this show have maybe even unknowingly been a part of a class action lawsuit.
Sure, I know I have.
I have too. I've gotten those little emails that say, you got 75 cents coming to you from whatever.
Right. You're like every bit of your personal information is stolen for a Equifax breach. So Equifax is going to give you some identity theft protection.
Right. Or a discount.
Yeah, a lot of people probably have been a part of a class action lawsuit. You may not have paid attention to it. You may have gotten one of those things in the mail and just who cares. Or even if you read the fine print, you might have been like, this is literally not worth my time or responding for. But there's a lot of things that happen by virtue of you not responding to whatever card or something you saw, or even like an ad on TV that frankly qualifies as notifying somebody that, hey, you may be a member of this class action lawsuit.
Yeah, this kind of came up recently in my life, in that I've mentioned before that I'm on a Facebook page of a community in rural Georgia where I have some land in rural Georgia, and there are some Donald Trump supporters who are pretty upset that we're asking to overturn a class action lawsuit to overturn the election. Presumably because they don't like the result, but I didn't get involved. I didn't jump in there and say, what kind of damages you can prove or whatever.
Sure.
Because I think it would be interesting to try and prove emotional and psychological damage for an election assault. That would be an interesting case.
But that is, I mean, that is, it would be. Like most of the cases around the election, it turns out. But with that though, like you kind of hit upon a few things here. The idea that there's a group of people who were wronged in some way, in similar ways, who on their own might not get anywhere with the case, but collectively, like pulling together their resources or the multiple harms done, like taking those individual harms and turning them into one big mushy pile. That's the basis of a class action lawsuit, and it really kind of gets to the heart of why they exist, and that is that a lot of times you're suing like a big giant corporation with enormous resources at their disposal that can fight you all day long until not only does the lawsuit go away, but you don't have any money left. And when you really look at it at the end of the day, you might have really just been after 100 or 1,000 or even 10,000 or even $100,000 worth of damages, which might seem like a lot to you, but might actually be less than the amount that you would spend on that case. And so when you face those kind of odds as a judge, you're just not going to file that suit. Any reasonable person wouldn't file a lawsuit like that. But the problem is if that's the case, then that means that giant corporations who are doing ill stuff can just keep doing ill stuff, which is a new phrase I'm working on. I'm taking it out for a walk right now.
These people explain that.
Okay, well, this is an homage to the Beat Boys. But the idea that if, people are just going to let them get away with it because they can't afford the court fees, that's a problem, which is one of the big things that is one of the big benefits that class action suits provide. You can take all those separate people, put them together, and now all of a sudden you have a formidable opponent.
Yeah, and it's obviously a part of civil law as opposed to criminal law, where I mentioned you have to have some sort of injury. It could be physical, it could be emotional, psychological, obviously financial. And it's what's known as a device in civil litigation. And all that means is sort of that it doesn't really, it's sort of the same thing as any other civil case, but it just allows multiple people to take part. And, we'll go over all the little minor differences, but it's sort of like treating that big body of people as a plaintiff. And in fact, they do have to even have a representative plaintiff. Like, it can't be, all Volkswagen owners versus Volkswagen. It would be, and of course we'll talk about that real case, but I'm just making this up. It would be Josh Clark versus Volkswagen, and then Josh Clark would have a million angry Germans standing behind him.
Do I win? In this theoretical lawsuit? Tell me, what's the outcome?
I shouldn't pick Volkswagen because that was a real case that we'll talk about, but let's say it was, I don't know, Yugo. Josh Clark versus Yugo.
Okay.
Remember those cards?
Yeah, sure. I don't think Yugo was trying to advertise itself as anything but Yugos. That was their whole shtick,
Super cheap. You don't see those in the front anymore, do you?
Oh, no. I think after just a couple of years, you stop seeing those on the road.
But yeah, you have a representative plaintiff or a lead plaintiff, and theirs is the name that appears on the case, even though, and we'll learn later too, that they in fact also, they get a little bump, get a little extra money for being a lead plaintiff.
Yes, they do get a little, because they're the ones who have to go through all this stuff. They might have to show up to court, they're the ones who have to coordinate with the lawyers, they're the ones actually suing. But the thing is if you show up and say, I am we'll take a recent example. I use Johnson. I'm a woman here in this situation. I have a vagina, and every day for 50 years I've been using Johnson & Johnson's baby powder on my vaginal region, and as a result, I have ovarian cancer. And the doctors have said, yeah, talcum powder is really bad for you. Johnson & Johnson's known this forever, but they just didn't tell anybody. So I want to sue Johnson & Johnson. And at the legal offices that I walk into and say this to, first of all, the lawyer's going to jump up and click his heels and then say, I'm very sorry that this is happening to you. But the lawyer will probably think, there's a lot of people who use Johnson & Johnson's baby powder. I wonder if there's anybody else like you. We'll start to do research, and all of a sudden, your one lawsuit is going to include a lot more people, and will probably become certified as a class action lawsuit. But you, the person who initially filed this, will remain that representative plaintiff.
Yeah. Boy, I gotta say, that's where I had a lot of emotional peaks and valleys.
Thank you. I'm doing much better now, by the way.
Good, I'm glad. It's okay down there. And it, it does usually, but not always, because there are also cases like Enron, which we'll talk a little bit about, but a lot of times it involves product liability. When Bridgestone, Firestone had stuff going on there in the early 1990s,
right?
And I guess for a decade, the U.S. came down and the judge said from anyone who had a car owned or leased 91 through 2001, if you had a Ford Explorer during those years, then you are part of this class. They call that the class.
Right.
And then the attorney who represents that class, we'll talk about how they get selected. They are many times referred to as class counsel, which sounds very much like some middle school title that you would run for or something. But whenever we say class counsel, just think that's the attorney representing all these people.
Right.
Class.
Yeah. So you want to take a break and then talk a little bit about the history of this stuff?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
This episode is brought to you by IBM. Today, every answer matters more than ever before. Because whether it's about health, deliveries, or finance, some things just can't wait. That's why IBM is helping businesses manage millions of calls, texts, and chats with Watson Assistant. It's conversational AI designed to help your customers find the answers they need faster, no matter the industry. Let's put smart to work. Visit ibm.com/Watson Assistant to learn more.
Hey friends, we've talked about it on the show before about student loans and how they can drown you, but you should let it drown your future. You should make a splash. Splash Financial.
Yes, Splash Financial is your student loan refinance destination designed to help you save money on student loans. Their innovative technology gives you quick access to a best-in-class network of lenders so you can get great rates and achieve your financial goals.
It takes just 2 minutes to get a rate quote and doesn't impact your credit score. So, what are you waiting for? Splash even offers a low rate guarantee. Just go to splashfinancial.com/know. Start saving today. That's splashfinancial.com/ANOW. Start making a splash.
So Chuck, you said that class action lawsuits are a type of civil law, right, which is not criminal law. But even more specifically than that, because they're part of civil law, they're actually based on common law, which is the legal body that's been formed over the centuries, starting in England. And even further back than that, it turns out the Vikings are really the first court that was ever set up in Europe. But they actually started a lot of legal precedent that made its way over to England, that in turn made its way over to America. So, helmet tip to the Vikings for all that. But common law is like the sum of all the judicial decisions made over those centuries that set precedent that was built on and expanded on and refined. That's common law. And common law is the basis of, originally, of hearing these kinds of cases, which are class action lawsuits.
Yeah, at least they didn't call them class action suits in 1125, but they had them, and it wasn't, thousands of people against a tire company. It was a few people, but in England, they allowed a handful of people to get together occasionally in the village.
Yeah.
And, maybe, I'm not sure, I really don't find why exactly they did this. Initially, my guess would just be the efficiency of the court, maybe, early on. Which is sort of how it still is in a lot of ways, rather than trying thousands of cases or hundreds of thousands of cases.
Yeah.
You can just get everyone together in one room And that's what they did in England. They allowed a few people to file a single complaint against the court, and this kind of carried over the years, eventually into colonial America, along with some other stuff dealing with law. Like you said, a lot of it sort of, some didn't stick, some did.
Yeah, no, there's like a period apparently from about the middle of the, I guess about the 1500s, no, the 1400s to the middle of the 19th century, where this just kind of went away in England, but it persisted in colonial America, and then carried on and then went back to England, and found purchase in about the middle of the 19th century in England's equity courts, which is a specific kind of court. It's now part of regular civil court now. But for a little while, it was its own thing, where if, say, like, you hired a tinsmith to make a gravy boat for you in, like, 1758, you would take that guy to civil court if he gave you one that was, like, only half of the gravy. There's no gravy in it, so what are you going to do with this thing? It's totally useless, so you take it to court. Well, you would probably expect money for damages, the money that you gave them, return to you. Civil court would handle that. If you wanted to, say, make the tinsmith finish the job, complete this gravy boat, then you would probably take them to equity court. Equity court was a court that had to do with everything except monetary damages and criminal court. It was the creative kind of court, where it really kind of called on a judge's fairness and imagination to solve whatever problem was brought before it. And these equity courts, like I said, were eventually fused into regular civil courts, but they are where our understanding of the modern understanding of class action lawsuits was born.
Get some of that 18th century gravy.
Man, I love gravy. I don't care what's in it.
It's good banding, too. So, the problem with equity courts, even early on, is that there was really no kind of codified procedure for everything, especially as these cases got bigger and bigger as far as people grouping up. There was no standard procedure. And one of the biggest challenges with that, or I guess biggest controversies, was whether or not people that weren't a part of that case, technically, but were still a part of it because they had the wagon wheel made by the local townsmith that was faulty, whether or not they signed up or not for that case, whether they were bound by that decision.
Right.
And it's a little counterintuitive to think about that, like, who cares if Goody Smith isn't a part of this case? Maybe he doesn't care that his wagon wheel is faulty or not. But what this does, if you look at it on the other side, is Goody Smith can't, like, once they settle this thing, Goody Smith can't come along and then say, well, I want to sue you separately.
Right.
So then Goody Smith couldn't come around later, or I guess until they changed it, could come around later and sue again. But they had to work all this out. They were like, that's not fair. You can't have this big civil case, have someone technically be a part of it, but not assigned to it, and then later on try to get their own separate thing.
Right. So, but I mean, that's I think how it was for a good, almost a little over a century, where you could say, like, I didn't have anything to do with this thing. Goody, by the way, is short for good one, so it's like Mrs. Smith. Yeah, but like the ninth grade Crucible reader in me could not just let that pass. Remember that play?
I do.
So the thing is, like, for a good century, like, even if you were considered somebody who would be a member of that class, if you hadn't signed on to this lawsuit, you could come back around and say, I didn't have anything to do with that. Like, I want to sue you myself. And that can kind of make things unwieldy, because one of the purposes nowadays for filing a class action lawsuit, at least as far as like the defendant as a big corporation is to just settle this once and for all. And so eventually they came up with something called Rule 48, which started to kind of include, it was like the first of the rules for class action lawsuits. And Rule 48 morphed into Rule 23. Rule 23, eventually in 1966, said, you know what, we're just going to say this. If you qualify as a member of a class action class, even if you have nothing to do with this, if you don't sign on, you're considered bound to the decision. Which means if the people suing these people lose, you can't go back and sue them again by yourself. You're bound by that decision. And in 1966, they said, well, how are we going to do this? And they said, well, we need to just notify people. Give people the option to say, I don't want to have anything to do with the suit, but I do want to sue these people on my own. And as long as you give them that option, the whole thing seems pretty fair.
Yeah, 1937 was when the Supreme Court first adopted these rules of civil procedure and the beginnings of Rule 23. And this is when they sort of just dissolved a lot of the separation between the law courts and equity courts. But it was until 66 that they finally realized that was an issue. And they also, I mean, it's a pretty dense thing, Rule 23. There was a lot that went on.
Yeah.
And then that was amended again in 2005 with the Class Action Fairness Act, which, among other things, said that if it's over $5 million, then this has got to go to federal district court because it's too much. Another one of the things from the Fairness Act of 2005 is it laid out some other criteria aside from the $5 million. It said that any case involving plaintiffs or defendants from like a bunch of different states, so it's like all across the country basically.
Yeah.
And they call that diversity jurisdiction. Then the federal court can actually, it has to go to federal court under that case.
Right, and then also if it's 100 people or over, it typically, or 100 plaintiffs are over, it typically goes to federal court. And I get the impression federal courts is basically like we're a little more equipped for the complexities and intricacies of a class action lawsuit. That's the impression I have. Do you?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're just set up for it. I imagine it would be tough for a state court to handle a case like Firestone, Bridgestone, with that many hundreds of thousands of people. Eventual plaintiffs over, but that's a lot of time.
So I think that's true, but I also feel like this whole thing smacks of federal courts just basically being like, let's just admit it, that state courts are run by hayseeds and yokels. That's what it smells like to me. There's definitely that undercurrent.
Federal court rules, state court rules.
Right. So, that Rule 23, which again is very dense, as you said, but it's also ominous sounding, if you ask me. Rule 23 sounds like it's going to mess you up pretty good. But it's basically the body of understanding class action lawsuits that's been established, since the 30s up to 2005 with the Class Action Fairness Act, like you were saying. If you read it, you can basically get a pretty good idea of what has to happen for a class action lawsuit to go forward. Apparently, each state has its own rules, but as far as the federal districts are concerned, Rule 23 is it. And the first thing you have to do is you have to become certified as a class. Like your lawsuit has to go from it's just me suing, Exxon for the oil spill, to I've got all these other neighbors and cannery owners around here who are all affected by this oil spill. And we think we have a good case against Exxon. And very importantly, we all have the same kind of harm. We have a common complaint, which is Exxon spilled a bunch of oil, messed up our livelihood and our lives. And we all, because we all have the same kind of case, the defense, Exxon, could mount the same defense against all of these complaints. So we would probably be certified as a class.
Yeah, the common defense in the case of Aaron Brockovich, I can't remember the name of the company that was the defendant, but the defendant, who was it?
Pacific Gas and Electricity.
Yeah.
The one that keeps setting off wildfires out in California.
So they couldn't then have a defense, one defense against a certain number of people or a certain kind of person in town, let's say.
Right.
That's probably more applicable. And then another for another kind of person in town.
Yeah.
They had to mount a common defense. It's basically, I think, all about equity, or making things equitable, kind of for both sides.
Yeah.
Which I thought was pretty interesting. And only, you have to get certified, and only 20 to 40% of lawsuits that are filed as class action even get certification.
Yeah. And the reason that was lower than I thought, but I guess it also makes sense. What I could not find is this, Chuck. What happens to the original lawsuit, the original plaintiff, if they're not certified as a class, or as a class action lawsuit?
You could probably just go sue on your own.
I don't know. I cannot find out. The way that I couldn't find out was the case that first piqued my interest about that was Dukes versus Walmart. I think it was Dukes et al. Versus Walmart, which turned out to be the biggest class action class ever created. It consisted of 1.5 million women who had been employed. It's bigger than the U.S. military, by the way. But they were every woman who was employed by Walmart between, I think, anytime after 1998. And the whole lawsuit was that Walmart was basically promoting men more quickly and giving men more resources to advance into management positions than women. And the idea was that if you were a woman, you were harmed by this equally. So it made sense that this would get certified as a class action suit, because any woman who worked for Walmart would have been harmed by not having the opportunity to advance. But then Walmart argued and said, well, you know, there's no national or company-wide policy that says you can't advance women, you can advance men more quickly. That all of these advancement decisions are made up of thousands and thousands of local decisions. So since there were so many different decisions that affected all these different women, this class doesn't make sense. And they actually won. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said Walmart's right. This doesn't make sense as a class action suit because all of the harms could have been for different reasons carried out by different people. The reason that does make sense to have that certification clause is because any defendant has a right to defend themselves against any accusation in court. And so if everybody's accusing them of the same harm, then it makes sense of certifying them together as a class. If there's different harms that aren't quite the same, then the defendant should be able to defend against that accusation, that accusation, that accusation, and you shouldn't lump all those people together into a whole class.
Right. So the judge is in charge of defining the class, and like we said, it's got to be specific to the problem. It can't be all Bridgestone tire owners, unless it's all Bridgestone tires. But it turned out it was just this one tire on this one car, and so you have to really define that. Like, if you had this car for these years, then you were part of this class.
Right.
And from that point, the notification that we talked about has to take place. Whether it's, you know, you see TV commercials probably that have this kind of thing.
Yeah.
You see advertisements in the newspaper, probably in the mailer. It depends on how broad it is. They're not going to do a TV commercial if they don't need to, because that costs money, obviously, and that's an expense. But they're going to notify everyone in pretty quick order, because what they want is for everybody to know they're a part of this class that's a part of that class, and whether or not you want to opt in or out. And if you opt out and you are within the scope of that class, you can do so if you want to. If it's, I'm not sure why anyone for these like kind of small things that seem to happen a lot would opt out.
Right.
I think they probably just count on people ignoring that kind of thing.
Well,
getting their check for $5 in the mail.
Sure, for literally not doing anything.
Yeah, you can't opt out if you're, I don't know, if you're a person who's just like, I don't want my name on any list and I don't want to be a part of any, you know, if you're kind of a paranoid type as far as the government and court cases go, you may want to opt out just to not be a part of something so small.
Well, I think the reason that they include it is because if you are let's say you were somebody whose house was washed away by the oil spill of the Exxon Valdez. But the class action lawsuit was everyone who was affected by the oil. So it would include people whose houses slid, or whose houses were a mile away, whose front yards got covered in oil. So you'd be like, wait a minute, whatever they're going to get is nothing like what I need, the damages that I'm seeking. So I'm going to opt out. And because they can't, and because
there's tons of real reasons to opt out. I'm talking about the $5 check from the credit.
Sure, but I'm saying like they can't differentiate who's getting that mailer from who's not, which is why they put the onus on the person getting that mailer, seeing that TV commercial, to say, oh, I need to opt out because I need to sue them on my own. I can't be part of this class. Because when that settlement is reached and they say everybody's going to get $5 for the trouble, that's what you got for your house being lost. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So then the judge is actually going to appoint the counsel, which is different than how it usually works. The judge is going to look at this and say, and this is for, I think for defense only, right? I guess the judge can change the plaintiff, but it's typically the lawyer who actually files the case. I think it's unusual the judge to overrule that, unless it's someone who just doesn't have the responsibility or maybe that kind of background.
Sure. Yeah, I think like if somebody walked in with the Johnson & Johnson complaint and the lawyer was just like a local ambulance chaser, they probably would get replaced with like a larger national firm that had the resources or the understanding, that had like contacts in like the professional witness field as far as like medicine and cancer is concerned. Like that guy just wouldn't have the resources, so he might be changed. But yeah, I'm guessing it's probably rare. But the point is that the judge has the ability to decide who is the lawyer for the plaintiffs in the class action.
Yeah, I think it's probably more rare because lawyers understand this, and they probably wouldn't file if they knew that they would be replaced, unless it's just to get it going and they know they're going to be replaced.
Like in, what was the Breaking Bad spin-off of Better Call Saul? When they, I think in like season 2 or something, when they figure out that the nursing home is taking advantage of the seniors, overcharging them, like the first thing that Saul did was go to the larger firm and say, like, we need to partner up, because he knew he couldn't handle it himself. That's what I'm guessing happens.
Yeah, and then I didn't see Better Call Saul. That's not right.
Oh, you did? It's pretty good. It's not Breaking Bad, but it doesn't seek to be Breaking Bad. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people like it better.
I can see that. It's a different show.
And then eventually the judge, and again, if you haven't noticed, and it's sort of like in the early days, the judge has a lot more say in class action cases than a lot of other kinds of cases. Really making a lot of decisions that they don't get to decide in other kinds of cases. In this case, one of the final things they get to decide is the distribution of damages. And they use other people for insight. They develop a plan with people on their team. But they develop this plan to distribute whatever monetary damages. If it's, $3 billion, they're going to figure out how to approve that settlement and how to distribute that settlement, including, this is a very key thing, as we'll see later, including how much those attorneys are going to get paid.
Right. So you want to take a break and then come back and talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages of class action suits?
Yeah, let's do it.
I mean, that become better real quick, but like, do I really want to sit there and invest in it?
Making your car buying experience as convenient as it is luxurious during the Infinity Winter Sales Event with Infinity Now. Is that not correct, Charles?
That is correct, because Infinity is rethought every step you take to get into a vehicle, so each aspect of the process can be on your terms.
That means that purchasing and leasing is offered online, so you can do it from the comfort of your home, or you can test drive without going to a dealership.
That's right, and get sales and service from anywhere with pickups and drop-offs that come to you. It's a type of luxury that's made to fit you and your lifestyle, so you can shop, buy, and service the way you want.
Infinity Now. Experience the new way to buy an Infinity at shopinfinitynow.com. Available at participating Infinity retailers. Hey Chuck, did you know that over the last 12 years, Subaru of America Inc. and its participating retailers have donated more than $176 million to help those in need through the Subaru Share the Love event.
I did, and at the end of this year, for this year, it's going to be over $200 million.
That's amazing. Through the Share the Love event, the ASPCA has had a significant impact on things like rescuing and transporting and adopting out more than 64,000 animals across the country.
Yeah, they also work with Make-A-Wish, one of the best foundations out there, and they've granted life-changing wishes of more than 2,500 kids with critical illnesses.
Yeah, not to mention Meals on Wheels and the National Park Foundation and National Park System have definitely benefited from the Subaru Share the Love.
That's right, so you can get a great vehicle and support a great cause. With every new Subaru purchase or lease, Subaru will donate $250. For choice of charities. People, there's power in numbers. A lot of people is more significant than one person, and a lot of people pooling their resources is more significant. Lawsuits cost a lot of money, and in many, many cases, it is not worth it for someone to go after a company for, you kind of just have to do the math, like how much is this going to cost me? What's the potential payout? Is it worth the risk? Whereas if you can band together with a bunch of other people, it's a huge, huge advantage.
Right, and one of the other advantages is the more people you have, the more damages are going to be awarded if the plaintiffs win, which means you're going to start attracting increasingly higher caliber lawyers to your cause, who could be your class counsel. And the reason why is because in cases where you're seeking damages, lawyers often don't get paid unless they win. But if you win, then the lawyers get a big fat payday out of it. So the bigger the class, the better the law firm or legal team representing that class is probably going to be. At least more experienced,
Yeah, for sure. Another huge advantage is that you're going to get your case heard. If in individual cases, they go first come, first serve. So if an individual brings a big lawsuit and they win, that company might be out of business before you can even get your suit going.
Right.
And if you're part of a class action lawsuit, it's going to make sure that everybody gets their piece of the pie, basically.
Exactly. So there's a lot of reasons to do this. Another one, too, is it makes sense for corporations. They have an incentive to try to settle fairly with the class action suit because it'll make this big years-long, sometimes decade-long problems go away finally, once and for all.
Yeah, and, there's a lot of press that comes along with a class action suit.
Yeah.
Far more press than an individual case. So it definitely behooves the defense to try and get these things wrapped up quickly because it's just bad news for them.
Yeah, and on the other side of that same coin, Chuck, like that large amount of press that gets generated by these big cases also kind of keeps corporate malfeasance in line,
Sure,
it makes the company. It probably does more than if we didn't have such things as class action suits, but that's one of the theoretical byproducts. How about that?
Yeah, I got some property to show you here.
Is it called the Brooklyn Bridge?
It's wonderful.
So there are some problems with class action suits. They're not the candy land that we've described them as entirely. Instead, there's a lot of frivolous class action suits that have been filed over the years by lawyers who are looking to make a fast buck, in part using that bad press as a threat. Like, do you really want this to be, to get dragged out in court? Just go ahead and settle, and, I'm the lawyer, I'll take my big fat cut. And that's a big problem, actually, and it's a big perceived problem, too, that class counsel walk away, whistling and laughing all the way to the bank, while the individual members are just getting $5 for their problems, even though they're the ones who had the thing befall them in the first place.
Yeah, and also, you know, if you choose, like, let's use that Exxon example. If you get bad legal advice and your house was destroyed more than other people's property, and you don't opt out, you can't then say, oh, well, you know, I only got this much. My whole house was destroyed. I really want to bring a lawsuit
that's way
again.
over.
You can't do that unless you opt out. So that is a disadvantage that's sort of your one shot, basically, at any compensation.
Yeah, I think the rule of thumb is if you didn't even know that this wrong had befallen you, it's probably not that big of a deal, and you're not going to want to opt out, because then that means you have to hire your own lawyer and go through the trouble of suing somebody, which is never pleasant or fun.
Totally.
So, like I was saying, like those class lawyers are a favorite target of tort reformists and critics, because if the plaintiffs win, the judge rules in the plaintiff's favor, one of the things the judge will do is figure out what the compensation is for the lawyer it's going to be. A lot of times that comes out of the settlement, right? Like if everybody gets $10 billion, the judge will say, well, you, attorney who led this case in your law firm and your legal team, you're going to get this fee. And I was reading up on it, and it sounds like it's fairly arbitrary. There's no good rule of thumb. And in fact, lawyers who represent class actions may actually get a lower percentage fee than they would if they were representing somebody on an individual basis. But the thing is, these payouts can be so huge that even if it's a really small percentage, it's going to be just this incredibly large amount in real numbers. And so a lot of people are like, that guy didn't earn that. They didn't deserve that, especially when they find out that, you know, 1 million people got a coupon for half of a free tire from Firestone for having deadly tires on their car for 10 years.
Yeah, those are, and they, you know, they tried to rectify that in part of the CAFA, the Class Action Fairness Act of 2005. These coupon settlements, those really rubbed me the wrong way. It wasn't a class action suit, but there was something involved. At one point, I was a season ticket holder for the Atlanta Falcons, and I can't remember what the deal was now. It wasn't a class action suit, but there was something where they wronged the season ticket holders in some financial way.
Terrible playing?
Yeah, we should have brought a class action suit for the past 35 years.
Those North Georgia people would join.
Yeah, exactly. But they did that coupon thing, and they were like, well, because of whatever it was, this upcoming season, season ticket holders will get 25% off anything from the Falcons merch store.
Oh, no.
And that just really rubbed me. It's like, because you're spending more, like the people that fall for that
right,
are just giving them even more money.
That's a big criticism, is that it establishes or keeps established an ongoing commercial relationship between the person who wronged you and you, the person suing them. And that is a big criticism. Some people say a good reply to that is just have cash settlements, or you could have a whole product settlement. Like rather than you having a coupon for some percentage off, so you still have to give them money, they say, we'll give you the jersey of your choice free and clear, and you never have to see us again. Or maybe even like from the NFL.com store. It doesn't even have to be like a Falcons jersey. That's a solution to that too. But one of the big problems was lawyers who were representing these coupon cases, they were taking a percentage of the entire value of the coupon.
Of all the
right. And so what CAFA in 2005 or 6 sought to change was saying, like, you really shouldn't do that, because a lot of people don't actually redeem that, so you shouldn't get a percentage of the people's coupons who are never going to redeem that coupon. You should get a portion of the coupons that are going to be redeemed. And that is just as hard. Figuring out how many coupons are going to be redeemed is as hard as it sounds, from what I understand.
Yeah, and there's one case in 2013 that you sent over that was pretty interesting. There was a teenager, his name was That Guy, who measured his Subway sandwich, his foot long.
Wait, he was Australian, so say it in Australian.
He was That Guy.
Nice.
And he measured his foot long, and it was only 11 inches long, and he took it to attorney Jackie Childs. And then Jackie Childs didn't take the case, and so the kid went away. And then another kid measured his sandwich, and his name was Well Actually, and he actually got this thing taken to court because he didn't have a 12-inch sub from his Subway sandwich. It baked up a little bit short.
Yes.
And that was an actual case. And of course, I'm kidding around about those names, but although I wish I wasn't. The attorneys there were going to get over $500,000 in fees for what ended up being no payout whatsoever, just Subway saying, we'll make these things bake up to 12 inches now.
Well, Subway even said we can't guarantee that. We cannot. They're like, bread doesn't bake in exactly the same way. It's just, that's not how it works. And the court even tended to agree with that. But the point was, no one was going to get anything. Not even like a free 6-inch sub. Nothing.
A free inch.
Yeah. Not even a free inch. You were just going to get, Subway will stay in business. But these lawyers were going to get $500,000, and the judge is like, you know what, forget this. We're just going to dismiss this entire case.
That's right. Jackie Childs was very disappointed.
There was also a similar one when the Center for Science in the Public Interest hired some lawyers to sue Coca-Cola, who owned Vitamin Water at the time. And Vitamin Water used to have this hilarious ad campaign where it promised all these ridiculous health benefits that any reasonable person knew were not true. And they weren't suing for that. They were actually suing because Vitamin Water didn't disclose how much sugar it had in it. Even though it was ridiculous health claims, it was still kind of purporting to be healthy. And the Center for the Science and the Public Interest was like, this is not healthy at all. And so they sued. Coca-Cola didn't do anything but stopped, I think, advertising the way that they were. But those lawyers still got $2.73 million in fees, even though no one else got anything.
32 grams of sugar in Vitamin Water.
Yeah, I believe it.
Crazy.
Tastes delicious.
I didn't know I had sugar, but I'm offended.
Yeah, that's why they got sued.
And there have been some very famous civil class action suits over the years. The largest ever, obviously, were the tobacco settlements.
Yeah. And
that was by tenfold next to the second highest one. Tobacco settlements, and I don't think it's over yet even, $206 billion so far from that 1998 decision. 46 states, the attorney generals from 46 states were involved, and they obviously couldn't pay that out all at once. But what they were ordered to do was pay out for medical costs for smoking-related illness over the course of 25 years.
Yeah.
The next highest was the BP spill for $20 billion.
Wow.
Volkswagen comes in at number 3 with $14.7 billion. And that one was pretty significant in that it wasn't a coupon payout. It was a pretty good restitution, I think, in that they said, you know what, we will actually buy back, we'll fix your car for nothing, or we will buy back your car or end your lease with no penalty.
Right.
And this is when Volkswagen cheated the software to try and cheat U.S. emissions tests. Big scandal.
So long. It was a big scandal. There's plenty that are still unfolding as we speak, like the Johnson & Johnson talcum powder one. If you watch Svengoolie or anything else on MeTV, you're probably well versed in the Boy Scout of America sex abuse case that's ongoing.
Yeah,
apparently
my brother was one of the first plaintiffs in that case.
Oh, I think I remember you talking about that. Yeah, now there's 70,000 members of that class enrolled. And then if you've ever heard that ad for Mesowood, it's actually a mesothelioma guy that you will get sent to you by the lawyer of that class action settlement, who's still looking for plaintiffs against the asbestos manufacturers. There's still plenty ongoing. Now that we've talked about this, it'll be like that Baader-Meinhof thing where you'll see class action ads on TV all the time.
Yeah, Enron was a big one. Remember Fen-Phen, the diet drug?
Oh, yeah.
That was a big one. That was a $3.8 billion payout. The silicon breast implants, that was a big payout.
Yes, but that one, from what I understand, was total BS. It was based on medical hysteria, and later science backed up the company's claims that they had nothing to do with, I think it was connective tissue disorder.
Oh,
the science, nobody was carrying out the science. It was all basically paid testimony for the plaintiffs, who were not necessarily even scientists. And on the other side, nobody had any science, and then science came later on, but it was after the settlement had been reached for billions of dollars. That was a bit of a scam, it turns out. Did they get it back? I don't think so.
Probably.
I don't think so.
It's a reverse class action suit.
Right. It's one company suing millions of people. You got anything else?
I got nothing else.
All right. Well, if you want to know more about class action lawsuits, just watch NoEmpathy. And since I said that, it's time for this one there.
Hey guys, this is another coincidence email. And this one, we get a lot of these, like, hey, I was listening to the show, there was a tornado near me, or whatever about tornadoes, but I thought this one was special. Hey guys, I was listening to the Fort Knox episode and a listener letter about wetlands and having to be at a wetland. And I share, I've had two very random coincident things. A few years back, I was driving into a small town in southwest Colorado where I live, and one of you mentioned a penny farthing. If you don't know what a penny farthing is, dear listener, it is the bicycle with that giant front wheel and the tiny little back wheel from those 19th century, I guess.
Yeah, early 20th, one of the two.
I glanced over to the bike lane, and sure enough, there was a guy riding a penny farthing.
That is the most amazing thing I've heard in a long time.
I've never seen one in real life.
I don't think I have. I think I've seen like an antique in the store or something like that, but I've never seen somebody riding. Although this would not be nearly as amazing if the person turns out to be riding from Brooklyn. Because I'm sure that's a pretty common sight.
In Brooklyn, Colorado, would be something else.
Yeah, I guess so.
But what are the chances this guy's listening to that? It's amazing.
It is astounding. Yeah, I mean, why were we even talking about penny farthings in the first place, you know?
It's a good word. Sure. It was the first time I had seen one of those in that town. I've lived in for 25 years. Next was this summer, after dropping off some clients and throwing your episode about ice climbing, just as I was driving out of town to a mecca destination for ice climbers around the world. It's a little less impressive. I like that.
Sure. Yeah, I do too.
And that is from Sean in Telluride, Colorado.
Very nice, Sean. Thank you for the first anecdote. The second one, thanks for nothing. If you want to get in touch with us like Sean did and tell us your best anecdote, we want to hear it. You can get in touch with us via email at stuffpodcast@iheartradio.com.
Stuff You Should Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.
What's up, everybody? It's Jill Scott, and here's one of my favorite moments from J-Film, the podcast. Brought to you by Netflix new film, Ma Rainey's Black. Theaters now. Pay for artists today. Check.
Over the last 12 years, Subaru of America imported January 4th.
Uncovering business insights shouldn't be a leap of faith. Using the prescriptive data modeling techniques learned in...
I've chosen How Chaos Theory Changed the Universe. It first came out in July of 2016, and I have to say, I think it's one of the better science-y Stuff You Should Know episodes of all time. There's just something about this that we have me and Chuck callers and said, I'm interesting, aren't I? And we said, yes, you definitely are. And this one has everything. It has science, it has philosophy, it has our understanding of the universe. It's an all-around good episode. So I hope you enjoy it as much as I did listening.
Welcome to Stuff You Should Know, a production of iHeartRadio's How Stuff Works.
Hey, and welcome to the podcast. I'm Josh Clark. Start off with you, Chuck Bryant, and Jerry over there. So this is Stuff You Know, podcast about the life. Have you ever seen Event Horizon?
I did. Not bad.
Great movie. Are you crazy?
It was great.
Oh, it's so imaginative.
Oh, it was okay.
It was like a Lovecraftian thing out of things.
Yeah.
Love it. It was alright. I love crafting.
Yeah.
That's what I think of when I think of chaos. You know, there's that one part where they kind of give you like a glimpse behind like this dimension that this action is taking place in.
Yeah.
To see the chaos underneath.
Oh, I should check that out again.
Yeah.
I think about Jurassic Park and Jeff Goldblum as Pete. Malcolm playing chaos and the little auto driving SUV or whatever that was.
Right. Yeah. That's what it's called in the script, the auto driving SUV.
Yeah, and you know what? I actually rewatched that scene, and it confirmed two things. One is that he actually did a pretty decent job for a Hollywood movie. A very rudimentary explanation of chaos.
Yeah.
And
you watched it for this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just that scene.
Yeah.
And then it also confirmed what that character was.
Yeah.
If you watch that scene, he's like, you know, he's all gross and flirty with her right in front of her ex.
Right.
But there's this, you know, he's talking to her. I didn't even notice this at first. He just like touches her hair out of nowhere for no reason.
Oh, really?
He's just talking to her, and he just like grabs her hair and touches it.
Huh.
And I'm like, what a creep.
I know. If you look closely, you can see the hormones emerging through his chest hair.
Yeah.
From,
and I love Jeff Goldblum. It's not a reflection on him.
He was basically doing Jeff Goldblum.
Well, that's what he... Yeah, sure.
He's Jeff Goldblum.
But I don't think... That's how in American which he speaks, but I don't think he's a creep. Do you? Wow.
Okay, no, it's not.
Okay.
I think he's doing Jeff Goldblum.
He was also a sign of the times. Like, if that movie were made today, Dr. What was her name?
Ellie Sattler, I think?
Yeah, Dr. Sattler would be like, it's very inappropriate to stroke my hair, dude.
Yeah.
Like, don't touch me.
Right.
This was the night.
Yeah, I mean, freewheeling. It was the early mid-90s, I think, 92, 1994. The book came out in 1990. And in the book, Ian Malcolm, who's a pediatrician.
Yeah, a pediatrician.
Right. He goes into even more depth about chaos theory. But that was the first time I ever heard of chaos theory was from Jurassic Park.
Yeah, me too, probably.
And it was really misleading. I think the entire term chaos is very misleading as far as the general public goes. It's from what I researched in for this article.
Well, yeah, I mean, you hear the word chaos as an English speaker, and you think frenetic and crazy.
Out of control.
Yeah, and that's not what it means in terms of science like this.
Right. What it means, I guess we can say up front, is basically the idea that complex systems do not behave in very neat ways that we can easily grasp, understand, or measure.
Right, and not even simple systems don't sometimes. They don't always have to be complex, but I want to give a shout out to stuff like this, brain breaking stuff for me.
Man, this is a brain breaker.
You know how I always go to like blank for kids because that always helps.
If there's a dinosaur mascot on the page, it's a sure thing we can understand it.
But the best explanation for all the stuff that I found on the internet was from a website called Avarum, A-V-A-R-M Publications, which turns out to be a website about biblical patterns. Mm-hmm. Sandwiched in the middle there is a really great, easy to understand series of pages on chaos. So I was like, man, I get it now. I mean, in a rudimentary way.
Right. Well, yeah. I think a lot of people who deal with systems that display chaotic behavior, which I guess you could say that they all systems eventually, under the right conditions, don't necessarily understand chaos.
Yeah, and they define a complex system as specifically that it means like, oh, it's complex. It is.
Right.
But specifically, they define it in a way that we understand. It's a system that has so much motion, so many elements that are in motion.
Moving parts.
Yeah, that it takes like a computer to calculate all the possibilities of like what that could look like 5 minutes from now, 10 years from now.
Right.
So before computers came around, before the quantum mechanical revolution, it was a lot more basic. It was like, what comes up must come down. Something like that.
Let's talk about that, Chuckers, because when you're talking about chaos theory, it helps to understand how it revolutionized the universe by getting a clear picture of how we understood the universe leading up to the discovery of chaos, right?
Yeah.
So prior to the scientific revolution, everybody was like, oh, well, it's God. The Earth is at the center of the universe, and God is spinning everything around like a top, right?
Yeah.
It was all a theistic explanation. The scientific revolution happens, and people start applying things like math and making like mathematical discoveries and figuring out that there's order. They're finding order in patterns and predictability to the universe.
Yeah.
If you can apply mathematics to it.
Yeah, specifically if you can apply mathematics to the starting point.
Right. So if you can figure out how a system works, mathematically speaking, right?
Yeah.
You can go in and plug in whatever coordinates you want to.
Yeah.
And watch it go. You can predict what the outcome's going to be. And what this is, it's based on what at the time was a totally revolutionary idea. Initially, I think Descartes was the first one to kind of say, cause and effect is a pretty big part of our universe, right?
Yeah, it was sort of like where this is 1600s, where early science met philosophy.
Right.
They kind of complemented one another as far as something that's we're talking about determinism.
Right. So that was the kind of the seed of determinism, was the scientific revolution, and like you said, where philosophy and science in the form of Descartes, right?
Yeah.
Then Newton came along. We did a whole episode.
Yeah, January this year.
That was a good one. I think you said in that episode that there's possibly no scientist that's changed the world more than Newton. He's got legs.
People shouted out others in Newton, but I'll just say he's not too sure.
Crean.
Yeah.
So Newton came along, and Newton said...
That was his name, Isaac the Crean Newton.
Right. Anytime he don't, he'd be like, Crean!
Yeah.
You just got Crean.
Oh, I thought he was a boxer.
He was much more well known as a boxer, but he definitely could dunk as a b-baller. Yeah. So, man, that threw me off a little bit.
That's right. The Crean.
Yeah, the Crean comes along, and he basically says, watch this, dude. This cause and effect thing you're talking about, I can express it in quantifiable terms. And he comes up with all these great laws.
Yeah.
And it basically sets the stage, the foundation for science for the next 3 centuries.
Yeah, these laws that were so rock solid and powerful that scientists kind of got ahead of themselves a little and said, we're done. Like, with Newton's laws, we can predict everything if we have a good enough beginning accurate value to plug into his equations.
Yep.
And they weren't, I think there was a little hubris and a little just excitement about like, well, we figured it all out.
Right, that you could take Newton's laws, and if you had accurate enough measurements, you could predict what the outcome would be of that system that you plug those measurements into using these formulas. Right?
And at the time, a lot of this was like planetary, like, well, we know that these planets are here and they're moving, they're orbiting. If we know these things, we can plug it into an equation, we can figure out what it's going to be like in years.
Exactly, and they figured out the basis of determinism is what we just said, that if you have accurate measurements, you can take those measurements and use them to predict how a system is going to change over time using differential equations, right?
Yeah.
So this is what Newton comes along and figures out, that you can describe the universe in mathematical terms using differential equations. And like you said, there was a tremendous amount of hubris, and well, I think you said there was some hubris. I think there was a tremendous amount of hubris where science basically said, we've mastered the universe. We've uncovered the blueprint of the universe, and now we understand everything. It's just a matter now of getting our scientific measurements more and more and more exact.
Yeah.
Because, again, the hallmark of determinism is that if you have exact measurements, you can predict an outcome accurately. Like the pool cue example, or the pool table example, right?
Right. So if you've got a pool table, let's say you're playing some 9-ball.
Right.
You have that cue full of diamond. Yeah. Set up. You got your cue ball. You put that cue ball and you crack it with the cue, and if you are super accurate with your initial measurements, you should be be able to plot out the angles where the balls will end up.
Right, exactly. You say this is what the table will look like after the break. If you know the force, the angle, all of those little variables.
Temperature, if there's wind in the room, and like the felt on the table, like everything, the more specific you are, the more accurate your end result will be.
Right, and then one of the other hallmarks of determinism is that if you take those exact same initial conditions and do them again, the full table will look exactly the same after the break.
Yeah, which is pretty much impossible for like a human to do with their hands.
Sure, but the idea at the time of science is that if you could build a perfect machine that could recreate these conditions, it will happen the same way every time, right?
Yeah, and this led to, they had hubris, but you could understand it when, like, literally in 1846, two people predicted Neptune would exist.
Yeah, within months
not would exist, but does exist.
Right.
And this is not by looking up in the sky. Like, they did it with math.
Right.
And they were right.
Yeah.
So imagine in 1846, when that happens, they're like, yeah, we've got the math down, so we're pretty much all done.
Well, plus also, for the most part, not just with Neptune, they were finding that this stuff really panned out. It held true for everything from, the investigation into electricity to new chemical reactions and understanding those.
Yeah.
And it laid the scientific revolution laid the basis for the industrial revolution.
Yeah.
And just the change that came out of the world like that, it definitely it is understandable how science kind of was like, got it all figured out.
Well, and like you said,
give me the last one.
Galileo was smart enough to know.
Built a miracle. Wasn't it the one I just looked at?
Uncertainty in these measurements. Like, the precision is key. So they spent, what does the article say? Much of the 19th and 20th century just trying to build better instrumentation to get more and more smaller and smaller and more precise measurements.
Right. That was like basically the goal of it, right?
Yeah, which was the right direction. That's like exactly what they should have been doing.
Yeah. The problem is like you said, Galileo knew that there was some sort of there were going to be some flaws in measurement that we just didn't have those great scientific instruments yet, right?
Yeah, it's called the uncertainty principle.
Okay.
Its accuracy.
Right. But the idea is that if you have a good enough instrument, you can overcome that. And that the more you shrink the error in measuring the initial conditions, the more you're going to shrink the error in the outcome. Yeah, it'd be proportionate, right?
They were correct.
The thing is, they were also aware, but ignoring in a lot of ways, some outstanding problems. Specifically, something called the n-body problem.
Yeah, you know what? I'm so excited about this, I need to take a break.
I think that's a good idea.
I need to go check out my n-body. What's that? We'll be back. The Moon Beer. It's about the McRib. They've spoken to their local city councils about keeping the McRib on the menu year-round.
Yeah, there's been petitions, op-ed articles, and a lot of cities get the McRib every year. Hi, participating McDonald's.
Finally.
All right, Chuck, we're back. So there's some issues, right, with determinism. There's some weird problems out there that are saying like, hey, pay attention to me, because I'm not sure determinism works.
Right.
And one is the n-body.
Yeah, how this came about was in 1885. It was King Oscar II of Sweden and Norway.
Yeah.
Love Norway. Both. He said, you know what, let's offer a prize to anyone who can prove the stability of the solar system, something that has been stable for a long time before that. And a lot of the most brilliant minds on planet Earth got together and tried to do this with mathematical proofs, and no one could do it. And then a dude named Henri, you gotta help me guys, say the whole thing.
Henri Poincaré.
There's an X. was French, believe it or not. And he was a mathematician, and he said, you know what? I'm not going to look at this big picture of all the planets in the sun and all their orbits.
You'd have to be a fool to try that.
Sure. He said, I'm going to shrink this down, like we talked about, shrinking that initial value.
Right.
Yeah. And that initial condition. He shrunk it down. He said, I'm going to look at just a couple of bodies orbiting one another with a common center of gravity, and I'm going to look at this. And this was called the n-body problem.
Yeah, which was smart to do because the more variables you factor into a nonlinear equation like that, just the harder it's going to be. So he shrunk it down. So the n-body problem had to do with 3 or more celestial bodies orbiting one another. So Poincaré said, oh, just start with 3.
Yeah. Smart.
And what he found from doing his equations for this sequel product was that shrinking the initial conditions measurement or rate of error, right?
Yeah.
Did not really shrink the error in the outcome, which flies in the face of determinism. What he found was that just very, very minute differences in the initial conditions fed into a system produced wildly different outcomes after a fairly short time.
Yeah, like when you just round off the mass of this planet at like decimal point.
Right.
And like, who cares?
Who cares?
At that point,
yeah,
you just round that 1 to a 2.
Right.
And that would throw everything off at a pretty high rate.
Right.
And he said, wait a minute, I think this contest is impossible.
Right. He said there is no way to prove the stability of the solar system because he just uncovered the idea that it's impossible for us to predict the rate of change among celestial bodies.
Yeah, it's such a complex system. There are far too many variables that it's impossible to start with something so minute to get the equation, whatever, the sum that you want.
Right. Well, not only that.
Not sum, I guess, but the result.
Not only that, and this is what really undermined determinism, was that he figured out that you would have to have an infinitely precise measurement.
Yeah.
Which even if you built a perfect machine that could take the infinitely, or a perfect machine that could take a measurement of like the movement of a celestial body around another.
Yeah.
It's literally impossible to get an infinitely precise measurement.
Yeah.
Which means that we can never predict out to a certain degree the movement of these celestial bodies. Like he was saying, like, no, you can't build a machine that gets measurements enough that we can overcome this. Like determinism is wrong. Like you can't just say we have the understanding to predict everything. There's a lot of stuff out there that we're not able to predict, and he uncovered it trying to figure out this n-body problem.
Yeah, and King Oscar the sequel said, "You win.
Yeah,
bring me the rack of lamb, and here's your prize."
Yeah,
and he won by proving that it was impossible, which is pretty interesting.
And that utterly and completely changed not just math, but like our understanding of the universe and our understanding of the universe, which is even more kind of earth-shaking.
Yeah, he discovered dynamical instability or chaos, and
Need something, citizen.
They didn't have supercomputers at the time, so it took a little while, about 70 years at MIT until we could actually
level 21 VHS.
Put these things into machines capable of plotting these things out in a way that we can see.
Right.
Which is really incredible.
So there was this dude 70 years later named Edward Lorenz. Or Lorenz.
Yeah, well, first of all, we should set the stage. The reason this guy, he was a meteorologist and scientist. Not that those are not the same thing. Right. He was a scientist who dabbled in meteorology.
You're right. He was a mathematician.
Yeah. But he was really into meteorology because there was a weird juxtaposition at the time where we were sending people into outer space, but we couldn't predict the weather.
Yeah, and it was definitely a blot on the field of meteorology.
Sure.
Like, people were like, "Do you guys know what you're doing?"
Yeah.
And meteorologists are like, you have no idea how hard this is.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, we can predict it a couple days out, but after that, it's totally unpredictable. It drives us mad. And it wasn't just their reputations that were at stake, but people were losing their lives because of it, right?
Yeah, in 1962, there were two notorious storms, one on the east coast and one on the west. The Ash Wednesday storm on the east and the Big Blow on the west that killed a lot of people, cost hundreds of millions of dollars in damage.
Right.
And people were like, we need to be able to see these things coming a little more.
Right.
Because it's a problem.
The meteorologists were like, why don't you do it then?
So they thought the key was these big supercomputers. Remember the supercomputers when they came out? The big rooms full of hardware.
Yeah.
It was amazing. And they were finally able to do like these incredible calculations you could never do before.
I know, they were able to like crunch 64 bytes a second.
Yeah, we had the abacus and then the supercomputer.
Right.
Nothing in between.
I looked up the computer that Lawrence was working with.
Was it the Whopper?
A Royal McBee. What was the Whopper?
War games.
Was it called the Whopper?
Yeah. WOPR.
Right. I can't believe they called it that. So the guy just nicknamed it Joshua?
No, Joshua was the
software?
Falcon was the old man who designed all the stuff, and his son was Joshua, and that was the password to get in.
Oh, that was the password.
Yeah.
I guess I was too young to understand what a password was.
Yeah.
Okay.
You didn't even, there weren't passwords at the time.
No. And you just shouted it at the computer, and they're like, okay, access granted.
Yeah. So that movie holds up.
Does it really?
Oh, totally.
I gotta check it out.
Yeah, it's still very. Young Ali Sheedy, boy, I had a crush on her from that movie.
She was great.
Yeah.
What else was she in? Wasn't she in something?
Well, I mean, she kind of went away for a while, and then had her big comeback with that indie movie, High Art. But that was a while ago.
She been in anything else recently?
Sure. I think I saw her something recently, and I didn't realize that was her.
Oh, really?
Like, she looks familiar. I was like, oh, that's Ali Sheedy.
Alright.
I could look it up.
Doesn't matter.
Anyway, I still crush on her.
So the Royal McBee was not quite the Whopper. You could actually sit down at it.
The Royal McBee?
That's the name of it.
That sounds like a hamburger, too.
It was by the Royal Typewriter Company. And they got into computers for a second. And this is the kind of computer that Lawrence was working with.
Yes.
And it was a huge deal. Like you were saying, abacus supercomputer.
Yeah.
But it was still pretty dumb as far as what we have today is concerned. But it was enough that Lawrence and his ilk were like, finally, we can start running models and actually predict the weather.
Yeah.
He started doing just that.
He did. So he started off with a computational model of 12 meteorological
I like how you said
calculations, which is very basic because they're infinite meteorological calculations, probably.
Yeah.
Depending. Did I say it wrong?
No, like it sounds like you're about to say it wrong, and then you pull it out at the last second. It's really impressive.
But so that's very basic. But he wanted to start out, with something attainable.
Right.
So he narrowed it down to 12 conditions, basically, 12 calculations that had, temperature, wind speed, pressures, stuff like that.
Right. Started
forecasting weather, and then he said, it'd be great if you could see this. So I'm going to spit it into my Wonder Machine, the McWhopper. What was it?
The Royal McBee.
The Royal McBee. And I'm going to get a printout so you can visualize what this looks like.
Right.
So things were going well, and he had this printout, and everyone was amazed because these calculations never seemed to repeat themselves.
He was making like word art. You remember that? That was the first thing anybody did on a computer.
Oh, yeah.
Was to make word art like a butterfly.
Right, you would print out, I never could do that.
I couldn't either.
You have to be able to visualize things spatially. So you have to have that kind of brain for that.
Right, or you have to be following a guidebook.
Well,
true. Have you ever seen Me, You, and Everyone We Know?
Yeah, I love that movie.
It's a great movie. Yeah. Those little kids in there, they were doing that.
Oh, yeah.
Forever, back and forth.
Well, I haven't seen that. It's been a while.
Oh, you gotta see it again. Yeah. Great movie. Ali Sheedy's not in it. It's Miranda July.
Right. She wrote directed too, right?
She did a great job. It's one of those rare movies where, there's just the right amount of whimsy. Because whimsy so easily overpowers everything else and becomes like, ugh.
Yeah.
This is like the most perfectly balanced amount of like whimsy I've ever seen in a movie.
Yeah, if there's too much whimsy, I'm just like
terrible.
Garden State, I just want to punch it in the face.
Terrible. Although I like Garden State, but I haven't seen it since it came out.
It hasn't aged well.
Yeah.
It's just, when you look at it now, it's just so cutesy and whimsical. Well, we can do a lot of movies today.
Oh, yeah, well, we're stalling.
We haven't even talked about Butterfly Effect yet, which is coming.
I'm dreading it. That's why I'm stalling.
Alright, so where were we? He was running his calculations, printing out his values so people could see it. And then he got a little lazy one day in 1961. This output, he noticed, was interesting. So he said, I'm going to repeat this calculation, see it again. But I'm going to save time. I'm just going to kind of pick up in the middle. And I'm not going to input as many numbers. But I'm still using the same values, just I'm not going out to 6 decimal points.
So the printout he had went to 3 decimal points.
Yeah.
So he was working from the printout and didn't take into account that the computer accepted 6 decimal points. He was just putting in 3.
Correct.
And expecting that the outcome would be the same, right?
Yes, but the outcome was way different.
Right.
And he went, whoa. What? Yeah. So what's going on here? It was a big deal. I mean, someone would have come up with this eventually, probably.
Yeah, but
he sort of accidentally came upon it.
It's neat that this guy did this because it changed his career. I think he went from emphasis on meteorology to emphasis on chaos math.
To stud scientist.
Basically. So, I mean, the guy's got an attractor named after him, you know what I mean?
Yeah, well, we'll get to that.
So, Lorenz starts looking at this and he's like, wait a minute, this is weird. This is worth investigating. And what was his name? Poincaré?
Yeah.
He said, I need fewer variables. So I'm not going to try to predict weather with these 12 differential equations that we have to take into account. I'm just going to take one aspect of weather called the rolling convection current, and I'm going to see how I can write it down in formula form. So a rolling convection current, Chuck, is where, you know how the wind is created, where air at the surface is heated and starts to rise, and suddenly cool air from higher above comes in to fill that vacuum that's left. That creates a rolling or vertically based convection current.
Yeah.
Okay?
I would describe it as oven.
Oven, boiling water, cup of coffee.
Sure.
Wherever there's a temperature differential based on a vertical alignment, you're going to have a rolling convection current. Okay?
Yeah, it sounds complex, but you just picked out one thing, basically, one condition.
Right.
And this is the one you picked out.
But had you seen my hand moving, listeners, you would be like, oh yeah, I know what you're doing.
Made little rolling motions.
So he's like, okay, I can figure this out. So he comes up with three formulae that kind of describe a rolling convection current. And he starts trying to figure out how to describe this rolling convection current. Right?
Correct.
And so, like I said, he got these 3 formulas, which were basically 3 variables that he calculated over time. And he plugged them in, and he found 3 variables that changed over time. And he found that after a certain point, when you graph these things out, since there's 3, you graph them out on a 3-dimensional graph,
level
so
21.
X, Y, and Z.
Again, he wanted to just be
try
able to
this.
visualize this.
Right.
It's easier for people to understand.
He's a very visual guy.
Pause
All
my
of a sudden,
podcast, so I'm not being
crazy
rude.
graph.
And plug in my headset just in case he talk. Let's see. Alright. There's no way I'd be using that. Let's see. It's just gonna keep giving me the same shit no matter what the hell I do. But whatever, it was something different, you know. .22 Bloody Arena opens. Well, that is. Looks like 5 players. I don't think I need any of the gear from there. That's what I'm saying. Most of this I'm not gonna need the gear from. Like a bold thing, it just doesn't seem like there's a single item I could get from there that would be good. The key, it says next reset is at 6 a.m. Does that mean you get 5 again? Or what? I don't know how it works. But nobody's in the stream that plays, I guess. At least nobody that plays is high level. I've been playing 2-3 days and I'm already in the 20s, so that's not bad, considering I haven't been pushing too hard. I'm playing a good amount, but I'm not like rushing through. Just kind of hanging.
Welcome, stranger. The roads aren't safe these days.
Not great, not great, not great.
Don't delay. Buy today.
Alright, how are we looking here? Over there, okay. Run over there, then you got up there, which is interesting. I got Spider Queen. I don't even know what this is for. Cat Sentinel Captain, it looks like. Cyclops. Teleport over there, getting that quest turned in. Then head to the north one first. Sounds good. Alright, let's unplug my headset. Okay. Just keeping going.
That where the line, as it progressed forward through time, went all over the place. It went from this axis to another axis to the other axis, and it would spend some time over here, and then it would suddenly loop over to the other one, and it followed no rhyme or reason. It never retraced its path. And it was describing how a convection current changes over time, right?
Yes.
And Lorenz is looking at this. He was expecting these three things to equalize, and eventually form a line.
Yeah.
Because that's what determinism says. Things are going to fall into a certain amount of equilibrium and just even out over time. That is not what he found.
No.
And what he discovered was what Poincaré discovered, which was that some systems, even relatively simple
I can do another currency
exhibit
exchange all of a
very
sudden.
complex, unpredictable behavior, which you could call
That's
chaos.
kind of cool.
Yeah, and when you say things are going all over, like if you look at the graph, it's not just lines going in straight lines bouncing all over the place randomly. Like, there was an order to it, but the lines were not on top of one another. Like, let's say you draw a figure 8 with your pencil, and then you continue drawing that figure 8, it's going to slip outside those curves every time unless you're a robot.
Sure.
And that's what it ended up looking like.
Yeah, it never retraced the same path twice, ever. It had a lot of really surprising properties, and at the time, it just fell completely outside the understanding of science, right?
Yeah.
Luckily, this happened to Lawrence, who was curious enough to be like, what is going on here? And again, he sat down and started to do the math and thinking about this, and especially how it applied to the weather, right?
Yeah.
And he came up with something very famous.
Yes, the butterfly effect.
Yes.
This thing kind of looked like butterfly wings a little bit. Yeah. And B, when he went to present his findings, he basically had the notion, he's like, I'm going to wow these people.
31,200 for 9,600.
And I'm gonna say something like, the seagull flaps its wings and it starts a small turbulence that can affect weather on the other side of the world.
Right.
A small little thing will just grow and grow, snowball, and affect things. And he had a colleague who was like, seagull wings, that's nice.
Right.
And he said, how about this? And this is the title they ended up with. Predictability, does the flap of a butterfly's wings in Brazil set off a tornado in Texas? And everyone was like, whoa, minds blown.
Yeah.
Should we take a break?
Yes.
All right, we'll be right back.
Picture this. 1927 Chicago. A black female blues singer has no problem going toe-to-toe with music executives to get what's owed to her. We're talking about the mother of the blues, Ma Rainey. Her story is so incredible. In the new Netflix movie, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, starring Viola Davis and Chadwick Boseman, we get to see how Rainey was well ahead of her time, recording sometimes controversial songs, and thus paving the way for artists we celebrate today for owning their sexuality. Ma Rainey appeared with jazz bands, jug bands, traveled with the circus, and even retained the rights to her songs. She's awe-inspiring on so many levels, and Viola Davis's portrayal of Ma is amazing. She steps right into her shoes. Go watch Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, and let her story inspire.
Bling headphones. Apply for yours at bankofamerica.com/more.
Valid. Described attractors and strange attractors in a way that even dumb old me can understand.
What you got?
So if I may, he says, all right, here's the cycle of chaos. He said, actually, let me put this. A woman could have been a small child.
Could have been Noah.
Of undetermined gender. I have no idea.
So the gender-neutral narrator.
They said, all right, think about a town that has like 10,000 people living in it. To make that town work, you got to have like a gas station, a grocery store, a library, whatever you need to sustain that town.
Okay.
So all these things are built, everyone's happy, you have equilibrium. He said, so that's great. Then let's say you build, someone comes and builds a factory on the outskirts of that town, and there's going to be 10,000 more people living there.
Right, and they don't go to church.
Maybe so. Did I say church? They needed a church?
No.
Oh, okay.
I was just assuming this was
the
way
website.
to equilibrium.
No. But you just have more people, so there's you need another gas station and another grocery store, let's say. So they build all these things, and then you reach equilibrium again. It's maintained because you build all these other systems up.
I see.
That equilibrium is called an attractor.
Okay.
So then he said, it said, they said.
He, capital E.
said, all right, now let's say instead of that factory being built, and you have those original 10,000, let's say 3,000 of those people just up and leave one day.
Okay.
And the grocery store guy says, well, there's only 7,000 people here. We need 8,000 people living here to make a profit. So I'm shutting down this grocery store. Then all of a sudden you have demand for groceries. So things go on for a little while, and someone comes in and say, hey, this town needs a grocery store. They build a grocery store. They can't sustain. They shut down. Someone else comes along with the demand. And it is this search for equilibrium, this dynamic. Well, you reach equilibrium here and there as the store opens.
Periods of stability.
Periods of stability. And that dynamic equilibrium is called a strange attractor. So an attractor is the state which a system settles on. Strange attractor is the trajectory on which it never settles down but tries to reach the equilibrium of periods of stability. Does that make sense?
That Bible-based explanation was dynamite. I understand it better than I did before, and I understood it okay before.
That's great. Sure, you can add it. Yeah?
Yeah.
No, you can add to it?
No.
That's it?
No, I mean, like, yeah, an attractor is where if you graph something and eventually it reaches equilibrium, it's a regular attractor. If it never reaches equilibrium, and it's constantly trying to and has periods of stability, it's an attractor. I can't top that.
Grocery store, small town.
That was great. So, Lorenz's strange attractor was named a Lorenz attractor. Yeah. Big deal.
They weren't using the word chaos yet.
No, but he published that paper about butterfly wings, right?
Yeah.
The butterfly effect. And it coupled with his the picture of a strange attractor, which is almost the, aside from fractals, almost the emblem or the logo for the chaos theory, the Lorenz attractor. It got attention off the bat. It wasn't like Poincaré's findings where it got neglected for 70 years. Almost immediately, everybody was talking about this. Because again, what Lorenz had uncovered, which is the same thing that Poincaré had uncovered, is that determinism is possibly based on an illusion.
Yeah.
That the universe isn't stable, that the universe isn't predictable, and that what we are seeing as stable and predictable are these little periods, windows of stability that are found in strange attractive graphs.
Yeah.
That's what we think the order of the universe is. But the sad is actually the abnormal aspect of the universe. And that instability, unpredictability, as far as we're concerned, is the actual state of affairs in nature.
Yeah.
And I think as far as we're concerned is a really important point too, Chuck, because it doesn't mean that nature is unstable, chaotic. It means that our picture of what we understand as order doesn't jive with how the universe actually functions.
Yeah.
It's just our understanding of it.
Yeah.
And we're just so anthropocentric that, you know, we see it as chaos and disorder and something to be feared.
Right.
When really it's just complexity that we don't have the capability of predicting.
Yeah.
After a certain degree.
Yeah, I think that makes me feel a little better, because when you read stuff like this, you start to feel like, well, the Earth could throw us all off different states at any moment. Because it starts spinning so fast with gravity. So, and I know that's not right.
I always love that kind of science that shows we don't know anything. Like, Robert Hume, who I know understand was a philosopher, but he was a philosopher scientist. His whole jam was like, cause and effect is an illusion. They're like, it's just an assumption, like that you drop a pencil and it will always fall down.
Yeah.
It's an illusion. It's just gravity, understanding gravity. So he makes a good point.
Gravity, just floating around.
Yeah. Well, this pencil down your wax.
Yeah.
But the point was that, you know, we base a lot of our assumptions, a lot of stuff that we take as law are actually based on assumptions that are made from observations over the time.
Yeah.
And that we're just predicting that all these things. I love that guy. And cool. This definitely supports that idea.
For sure.
Sorry, I'm excited about chaos. Do you believe it?
Well, I mean, I like that I've been able to understand it in enough way that I can talk about it.
Well, on the Bible website. Well, once you take the formulas out, for people like us, Oh, okay, we can understand chaos.
Yeah.
Same with the resistance. You would differential equation. So blue.
What? A different equation. Alright, so earlier I said that chaos had not been used, the word chaos, to describe all this junk. And that didn't happen until later on. Well, actually, not later on.
About 10 years.
You know, but it was kind of the same time that soda stuff was going on with Lorenz.
Yeah.
Late 60s, early 70s. There was a guy named Stephen Smale, Fields Medal recipient, so I was good at math. And he described something that we now know as the Smale horseshoe. And it goes a little something like this. So, alright, take a piece of dough, like bread dough,
okay,
and you smash it out into a big flat rectangle.
And do.
So you're looking at that thing and you're like, boy, this makes good bread.
It's going to be so good.
So then you
Put a
just,
little rosemary on it.
yeah, maybe so.
Oil,
sea salt.
Yeah, and then you lick it before you bake it, so you know it's yours. No one else can have it.
So you have that flat rectangle of dough. You roll it up into a tube. Then you smash that down kind of flat, and then you bend that down to where it eventually looks like a horseshoe.
Okay.
So now you take that horseshoe, take another rectangle of dough, you throw that horseshoe onto that, and then you do the same thing. The Smale horseshoe basically says you cannot predict where the 2 points of that horseshoe will end up.
Yeah.
You can roll it a million times, and it'll end up in a million different places.
Totally random different places.
Totally random. You never know. It's like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get.
You have to say it.
And that became known.
You have to say it.
Oh, what? Imitate Forrest Gump?
Sure.
I can't do that. He's not my repertoire.
That's
Although I did see that again, part of it recently.
Is it called up?
Well, I mean, take out 40 minutes of it, and it would have been a better movie.
Oh, yeah.
Like all of that coincidence stuff that.
Oh, I love that. That was so
and he
charming.
also did the Smile T-shirt.
Sure.
Like, it was just too much. Like, he really hammered it too much.
I like it. That was the basis of the movie.
I know, but see it again, and I guarantee you, like an hour and a half into it, you'd be like, I get it. So
You
that
know,
it's
you know, it was a good Tom Hanks movie that was overlooked. Road to Perdition.
yeah, that
was a good one.
great Sam Mendes.
Oh man, that guy's awesome. Oh, what is he gonna do? He might do something.
He did the James Bond, he did Skyfall.
Yeah, no, he's
And
gonna
also
do.
that last one that was so great.
He's got a potential project coming up, and he would be amazing for it. I don't remember what it was.
Did you see Revolutionary Road?
Yes, God, how it was just like,
Yeah, you want to jump off a bridge.
Yeah. like every 5 minutes during that movie.
It was hardcore.
It is. He did that one too, huh?
Yeah, and don't see that if you're like engaged to be married or thinking about
Yeah, or if you're blue already.
Yeah.
You take a really good mood and be like, I'm sick of being in a good mood. Sit down and watch Revolutionary Road.
Yeah. Watch Joe versus the Volcano instead.
Great movie.
Where was I? Smale Horseshoe is what that's called. And he was the first person to actually use the word chaos.
Oh, he was.
I think so.
Oh, no. York was. Tom York's dad.
Yeah, you're right. He wasn't the first person to work for that.
But Smale's horseshoe illustrates a really good point, Chuck.
Is it Tom York's dad?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, but they're both British.
Sure. Yorkies.
Actually, one's Australian. No, they're British.
Right.
So those 2 points, which started out right by each other,
Yeah,
and then
the
end up
horseshoe.
in two totally different places.
Yeah.
That applies not just to bread dough, but also to things like water molecules
Yeah.
that are right next to each other at some point, and then a month later they're in two different.
Yeah.
Even though you would assume that they would go through all the same motions and everything.
Oh, sure.
But they're not. There's so many different variables of things like protein currents that two water molecules that were one side by side end up in totally random.
Yeah.
And that's part of chaos. It's basically chaos personified.
Yeah.
The chaos molecule.
So we mentioned York. Where I was going with that was there was an Australian named Robert May, and he was a population biologist.
Yeah.
So he was using math to model how animal populations would change over time, giving certain starting conditions. So he started using these equations, differential equations, and he came up with a formula known as the logistic difference equation that basically enabled him to predict these animal populations pretty well.
Yeah, it was looking pretty well for a while, but he noticed something really, really weird, right?
Yeah.
He had this formula, the logistic difference equation is the name. Okay, so we had that formula, and he figured out that if you took R, which in this case was the reproductive rate of an animal population, and you pushed it past 3,
the number 3. So
that meant that the average animal in this population of animals had 3 offspring, like parentheses, whatever.
Yeah.
If you pushed it past 3, all of a sudden the number of the population would diverge.
Yeah, if you pushed it equal to 3, actually, or more.
Right, it would diverge.
Yeah.
Which is weird, because a population of animals can't be 2 different numbers, you know? Like that herd of antelope is not, there's not 30, but there's also 45 of them at the same time.
Yeah.
That's called a superposition, and that has to do with quantum states, not herds of antelopes.
Sure.
That was kind of weird. And then he found if you pushed it a little further, if you made the reproductive rate like 3.057 or something like that, I think it was a different number. But you just tweaked it a little bit, not even to 4. We're talking like millions of a degree. All of a sudden it would turn into 4. So there'd be 4 different numbers for that was the animal population. Then it would turn into 16. And then all of a sudden after a certain point, it would turn into chaos.
Yes.
The number would be everything at once, all over the place. Just totally random numbers that it oscillated between.
Yeah, but in all that chaos, there would be periods of stability.
Right, you push it a little further, and all of a sudden it would just go to 2 again.
Yeah.
But beyond that, it didn't go back to the original 2 numbers. It went to
nobody
another 2.
showed up.
So if you looked at it on a graph, it went line, divided into 2, divided into 4, 8, 16, chaos, 2, 4, 16, 2, 4, 8, 16, chaos.
Yeah.
All before you even got to the number 4 of the reproductive rate.
Yeah, and he was working with Mr. York, because he was Wolf and founded, so he was a mathematician buddy of his, James York from the University of Maryland. So they worked together on this. And in 1975, they co-authored a paper called Period 3 Implies Chaos. Man, finally, somebody said the word.
Yeah.
I kept thinking it was all these other things.
Yeah, and this paper, where they first debuted the name chaos, they based it, Tom Yorkstead based it on Edward Lawrence's paper.
Yeah.
He's like, you know what, I have a feeling this has something to do with the Lawrence factor. So that provided chaos to the world, and it was basically the third time a scientist had said, we don't understand the universe like we used to do.
Yeah.
And determinism is based on an illusion
Like, don't you get it?
of order in a really chaotic universe. And this established chaos. It took off like a rocket in the 80s and the 90s, as you know from Jurassic Park. Chaos was everything. Everybody was like, chaos, this is totally awesome. It's the new frontier of science.
Yeah.
And then it just went away. And a lot of people said, well, it was a little overhyped. But I think more than anything, and I think this is kind of the current understanding of chaos, because it didn't actually go away. It became a deeper and deeper field. People mistook what chaos meant. It wasn't the new type of science.
Yeah.
It was a new understanding of the universe. It was saying like, yes, you can still use Newtonian physics.
Yeah, like don't throw everything out the window.
No.
You can still try and predict weather and still try and build more accurate instruments.
Right.
And get, decent results. But you can't, with absolute perfection, 100% predict complex systems.
Like determinism, the ultimate goal of determinism is false. It can never be done. Because we can't have an infinitely precise measurement for every variable or any variable. Therefore, we can't.
Every time I try to attack more, I get hit.
You expect science to be like, what's the point?
Yeah.
What's the point of anything?
No, not science.
Well, some chaos people have said, no, this is great, this is good. We'll take this.
See what I mean?
Universe,
but if you just cycle around, you can slowly peck at them with your fucking dot.
And saying like, if the ocean temperature is this, at this time of year, and the fish population is at that time, then this is how many offspring this fish population has.
Yeah.
Saying, okay, here is the fish population, here is the ocean temperature, here are all these other variables, let's feed it into a model and see what happens. Not, this is going to happen, what happens instead? And this is kind of the understanding of chaos theory now. It's taking raw data, as much data as you can possibly get your hands on, as precise data as you can possibly get your hands on, and just putting it into a model and seeing what patterns emerge. Rather than making assumptions, he's saying, what's the outcome? What comes out of this model?
Yeah, and that's why, like, when you see some things like, 50 years ago, they predicted this animal would be extinct, and it's not. Well, it's because the variations were too complex.
Right.
They tried to predict, and that's why if you look at a 10-day forecast, rooster are a fool.
It's just, well,
10 days from now, since it's going to rain in the afternoon.
But if you took enough variables,
what the hell is a fucking octopus up over there? I can see its tentacles from here. Probably maybe that's where everybody is. I don't know where the fuck everybody's at. You think I'd be able to fucking have people here, but I think they're all over whatever the hell that is.
You can say, well, actually, we can predict a little further out than we think.
In fact, I kind of want to know what that is.
It's based on this theory, this understanding of chaos, of unpredictability, of not forcing nature into our formula, but putting data into a model and seeing what comes out of it.
Yeah, and then at the end of that, you learn, like, when that animal is not extinct, like you thought it would be, you go back and look at the original thing, and you have a more accurate picture of how they, take off slightly this one value, and then you have more buffalo that Sure.
You got buffaloed by chaos.
And we're not even getting into fractals. It's a whole other thing, and we did a whole other
I was thinking it was some kind of
in June 2012
event thing, but
about fractals, Mandelbrot, and
Man, we should end this. But first, I want to say there's a really interesting article that's pretty understandable on Quanta magazine about a guy named George Sugihara. And he is a chaos theory dude who's got a whole lab and is applying it to real life. So it's a really good picture of chaos theory in action.
Weird. I would have expected to see some.
More about chaos theory,
I got it down to 80%, like slowly ticking it away, wondering where the hell everybody's at.
You can type those words into how stuff works in the search bar. Any of those, fractals, LSD, chaos. It'll bring up some good stuff. And if it says good stuff, it's time for listening.
I'm going to call this rare shout out. Get requests all the time.
I bet I know which one.
Really?
Yeah.
Is it open? Yeah. No?
So far, so good.
Hey guys, just wanted to say I think you're doing a wonderful job with the show to this date. My first time listening was during my first deployment.
That's the one.
Yeah. When I listened to your list on famous and influential films, I was hooked after that. Since I came back stateside, I spent many hours driving to and fro to see my girlfriend, to my barracks, and I can happily say that they've been made all the more enjoyable by listening to you guys. Even my girlfriend Rachel has warmed up to you dudes, which was a pleasant shock to me. But she has told me repeatedly that she cannot listen to audiobooks because, quote, hearing people talk on the radio gives me a headache, end quote. Anyway, I hope you guys continue to make awesome podcasts, because I'm headed out on my next deployment, and if you could give a shout out to Rachel, I'm sure it would make her feel a little bit better that I got the pleasant people on the podcast to reaffirm how much I love her. That is John. Rachel, hang in there. John, be safe. And thanks for listening.
Yeah, man, thank you. That was a great email. I love that one.
Glad we don't give you a headache, Rachel.
Yeah, for real.
She listens to this thing.
Yeah, oh, yeah. Everybody's going to get a headache from this one. Like, I came to hate the sound of my own voice from this one.
I guess you're right.
If you want to get in touch with us, you can hang out with us on Twitter at SYSK Podcast. Same goes for Instagram. You can hang out with us on Facebook.com/StuffYouShouldKnow. You can send us an email to StuffPodcast@HealthWorks.com. And as always, join us at our home on the web, StuffYouShouldKnow.com.
Stuff You Should Know is a production of
$200 million.
Plus, you can stream with the SiriusXM.
Bill, the podcast, every Wednesday, and check out Ma Rainey's Black Bottom in select theaters now and on Netflix December 18th. This film is rated R.
We're live with Santa Claus ahead of the Mercedes-Benz winter event.
Any big plans this year, sir?
We'll be dropping off some new Mercedes-Benz models with available MBUX. It gives real-time weather updates. No more relying on radio notices.
Anything else, Mr. C?
We'll be flying a new route through Siberia. Should say 15 minutes. Have you heard the news? The Mercedes-Benz winter event is back with great offers on the enhanced GLA, the intelligent...
iHeartRadio.
Hey, and welcome to the podcast. I'm Josh Clark. There's Charles W. Chuck Bryan out there. Jerry's here. Special guest Jerry. This is Stuff You Should Know. The Super Subversive Edition.
Yeah.
Which is, I mean, it's subversive, but not coming from who you'd expect. In this case, the subversive people, Chuck, are two of the crookedest, worst Americans to ever take a breath of life in the United States.
Yes. Hoover and Nixon, right?
Yes. Herbert Hoover and Charles J. Nixon.
No.
No, not those two. Was it J. Edgar Hoover and Richard Nixon?
Richard Milhouse.
That's right. Milhouse. That's right. So you picked this one, right?
Yeah.
And I think we got help from our buddy. Was it? It was a Grabster article, right?
This is the Grabster.
So, just nobody likes to kill this guy.
Why did you choose this one, Chuck?
I'm just a Beatles nut. I'm reading a massive Beatles book, and I'm always thinking about the Beatles. So this isn't something I knew a ton about.
Yeah.
So now I know more.
What are you thinking about the Beatles, Brian?
They could write a song.
Like they could, like they're really good at writing songs, you mean?
I think so. I know you're not a Beatles guy, but they're regarded as good songwriters.
Sure, I'm willing to concede that at least. Yeah, I'm a grown person. I can concede when I'm wrong or when I'm incorrect.
Well, I guess I could solo. It's just going to take forever.
Yeah, that's where the tables are.
As you could tell from last time.
Did you like her singing? Isn't that right?
I appreciate it. I don't know if like is a pretty strong word, but I definitely appreciate it. There's some songs, like, have you ever heard I Love You, Earth?
Sure.
That's a pretty sweet song. I like her singing on that. But have you ever heard her her cover of Katy Perry's Firework?
No, I bet that's something.
She did it at maybe MoMA or the Met or something like that, and she's just standing there wailing. She's not singing words or anything like that, just wailing. And it was her cover of Katy Perry's Firework, and it's pretty great to see. I'm sure you look it up on YouTube. But I appreciate a lot of her stuff. How about that?
I appreciate her as a human, and it's always fun to look back at performances, live performances with Lennon when she would do a full 4 or 5 songs in a row in the middle of Madison Square Garden concert. And you could kind of see his backing band just kind of oh boy, I can't believe we're doing this. I can't believe she's really doing this.
Right. And she's actually pretty strongly implicated in this whole thing. We're talking about John Lennon being pursued and surveilled and basically harassed by the FBI in 1972, actually, 1971-72, I believe. For a very specific reason, and it was at a time when John Lennon and Yoko Ono had just got married. They got married 3 years before, and were a very famous couple. The Grabstar argues that they may have been like the first genuine celebrity activist couple who actually used their celebrity as a way
Definitely
to
a lot faster when I got somebody with me,
influence or help
obviously.
causes, that kind of thing. And by the time 1971-72 rolled around, Richard Milhouse Nixon was actually running for re-election again, and he decided that he didn't like people like John Lennon running around conceivably swaying the vote, particularly among newly minted voters in the 18 to 21-year-old block.
Yeah, I mean, he and Yoko had
What?
contributors.
I was not in range of that. Come
working
on,
class
man.
causes.
Oh, fuck with this
The
stupid
notion
shit.
that Lennon was always known as the working class hero, but of all the Beatles, he grew up more solidly middle class than any of the rest of them. And not to say that that was a false persona, but he definitely sort of jumped in, sort of leaned into that, as Noel Brown would say, as far as his persona. And I think a lot of people that don't dig deep kind of think that John Lennon grew up with a very hard scrapple life here in Liverpool, which is not the case. But as a result of that, he championed the working man. He and Yoko contributed to causes. He became, along with Yoko, very much pacifist activists. And if you're a pacifist activist in the early 70s, you're not going to be a big fan of Richard Nixon, and he's not going to be a big fan of you, because he was not shy about war.
No, he really wasn't. He'd even campaigned, I think in '68, on ending the Vietnam War, and then actually went the exact opposite direction with that. There was a lot, if you were a pacifist, there was a lot to be upset about in the 60s and early 70s because of Vietnam alone, you know?
Yeah, for sure. One of the ways I think that got the most press, that when people think about John and Yoko's activism, is the bed-ins that they had. That's BED-INS. And that is,
God, I did
you don't
it
know what those
again.
are? That's when you lay around in bed and you invite the press to come to your room and talk to you while you lay around in bed, and while you're laying around in bed. And it looked kind of ridiculous to a lot of people, especially people on the right. But John Lennon's whole kind of point, and he was very tongue-in-cheek, kind of had a great sense of humor, but I think it all sort of stemmed from that, which is like, hey, all you gotta do is stay in bed and not go and start wars, and this is a pretty ridiculous way to drive that point home.
Yeah, like rather than having to like go out and oppose violence, you could oppose violence just by laying around in bed and doing nothing, letting your hair grow, I think is what they were saying.
Sure.
Which is pretty awesome, and the thing is it's John Lennon and, you know, Yoko Ono, and they're sitting around in bed with the press in their hotel room, and like that in and of itself is getting press. And then if you say, well, what is all this about? And you read a little further into the article, I don't know, maybe it kind of gets you in just the right way, and all of a sudden you start thinking that way too. And to the people who were, you know, running the whole military-industrial complex, I mean, that's a threat. Even if it's just a threat of the threat of saying, like, just you don't even have to oppose war, just don't do anything, and that opposes war in and of itself. And that was like kind of the way things were at the time. Like, there was a lot of people in power who were really opposed to that kind of thinking, who were opposed to people who were opposed to Vietnam or war in general or violence of any kind. There was a big opposition to that, and the people who were running the show in the United States were chief among those people. Like we said, Nixon as president and then running for re-election, and then J. Edgar Hoover, who was not shy at all about doing whatever he needed to quiet dissent. Like, he would generate dossiers on elected officials, especially ones who were more liberal, to basically keep them in line by threatening them with blackmail or even the threat of blackmail, you know? There were plenty of hippies who got their heads cracked in. There were people who were surveilled. We did an episode on the Black Panthers, if you remember. We talked about COINTELPRO, the whole program to basically undermine and smear the Black Panthers in the public's mind. Like, J. Edgar Hoover was a vicious, terrible human being. And he ran the FBI for decades and was still running the FBI when they started to target John Lennon.
Yeah, so to set the stage here, kind of how this all worked out was John Lennon he was able to enter, the whole thing kind of boils down to whether or not he would be allowed to live in the U.S. or whether or not if he was eventually allowed to live in the U.S., if they could legally deport him. So he was able to enter the U.S. on a work visa in 71. And concurrent with this, Yoko Ono had a custody battle going on. She had a daughter from a previous marriage in the early 70s, and she wasn't going to leave at all. She was legally there. They did try and deport her. They didn't know that she had a green card already, which was sort of the first foible in this thing.
Right.
But they knew that they had a lot of leverage over Lennon, because if they deported him, he would be without his wife, who was going to stay there. So they have this leverage. Lennon loved living in New York City. That's where he wanted to make his permanent home.
And so much so that was also leverage that they had too.
Yeah, absolutely. And so Nixon's up for re-election in 72. He would go on to win, in a big way against McGovern. But they were, I was about to call them an organization. They were an administration that was very paranoid. They would, obviously, with Watergate, they showed that they were willing to do anything to ensure their victory. And that included being really worried about people like John Lennon. I don't think he was at the top of their list of things to worry about, but he was on their list thanks to Strom Thurmond, of all people.
Yeah, so Strom Thurmond, the horrible segregationist senator from South Carolina, right? He actually kicked this whole thing off because I guess he noticed that John Lennon was he was a left-leaning rock star activist. He seems to have been one of the first people to notice the activism that was developing among John Lennon and Yoko Ono, and to perceive it as a threat to the establishment, because all those recently enfranchised 18, 19, and 20-year-old voters who hadn't had the right to vote until the 26th Amendment had been passed. I don't remember exactly when it was passed, but it was between 68 and 72, because 72 was the first election those younger kids were going to be able to vote in. And he apparently saw Lenin as among a group of people who could speak to those kids and sway them to the left and potentially unseat Richard Nixon, which it would turn out is just a total laugh, because Nixon beat McGovern in a landslide. But at the time, they didn't know this, and Richard Nixon wasn't going to take any chances. So the note from Strom Thurmond was very well received in the Nixon administration.
Yeah, I think what I want to know is who told Strom Thurmond.
And that's what I want to know too, because that's the biggest mystery here.
Yeah, I doubt if Strom Thurmond was too hip to any of this, but somebody probably got in his ear, and he said he sent a note that specifically said they try and get him deported as a, quote, the strategic countermeasure.
Right.
And that's really kind of what got the ball rolling. We should also mention this other guy, John, I don't know if it's Wiener or Weiner in this case.
It's pronounced Wiener Slave.
Oh, it is?
No. Do you remember there was a 30 Rock episode where there was like an HR mediator, and he's like this very soft, rosy-cheeked, very calm, mild-mannered man, and Liz Lemon says, well, Mr. Weiner Slav. He goes, no, it's pronounced Wiener Slave.
I missed that show.
That was like a really good moment.
They had such great fun with dumb jokes like that, and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, right. No, that was Arrested Development.
Oh, that's right. That was Arrested Development. They kind of had the same DNA, though.
Yeah, for sure.
So, Wiener Slave was a writer, or is a writer and historian still, and he is why we know so much of this. He was writing a lot about John Lennon, writing a lot about the Beatles. He decided to file Freedom of Information Act requests to get a lot of these documents uncovered over the years, and eventually was successful in a big dump in 1997, then in another smaller one in 2006. And if it had not been for his tenacity, I don't know if anyone else would have picked up this mantle. Because, in the end, it's not the most interesting story in the world.
It's true.
I say that in a whisper. It's not like some huge, oh my God, revelations. It's sort of one of those things that's like just another example of the small things that authoritarians do in this country under, in the back rooms and in the whispered rooms of the White House.
Well, I think that's really true, and it's a really good point, is that, if you just look at it on its face, the FBI followed around John Lennon, kept tabs on him, and, if you read the files, it's really pedestrian, boring stuff. you might miss like the real story here. And the real story here is that a sitting president directed the FBI to get dirt that he could use against a political rival, an activist rock star, to help get him deported, or to figure out what leverage he could use against him so that sitting president could get reelected. That's the real story here. And that the FBI acted as this basically a Gestapo type agency on behalf of Nixon. That's the real story that kind of gets covered up by John Lennon and Yoko Ono's celebrity, and the FBI kind of wackily following him around.
Yeah, it is funny because if you look at some of the files and some of the reports, like they would go to his concerts, and undercover agents would go to the concerts and report things like, for his encore, he's saying "Give Peace a Chance," and we all know about that song.
Right.
They would take notes on song lyrics and stuff like that, so it's all just kind of silly. But yeah, I definitely agree that it's just an example of the lengths that Nixon would go to be a dirty thief.
Yes. Well, Chuck, I think we should demonstrate the links that we'll go to bring everyone a message. What do you think?
By just shutting up for 2 minutes.
Yeah.
Oh,
We're live with Santa Claus ahead of the Mercedes-Benz litter.
Buddy, I want to talk to you about your website. It doesn't look good, and it's hard to program because comings and goings on all of our live shows, and it's always a website or domain.
I'm making air quotes you can't see because he's busted with some pot. I think maybe some hash and like rolling paraphernalia. There's some really BS thief that they got him on in London. There was some true believer, zealous anti-drug cop named Detective Sergeant Norman Pilcher, who was later jailed actually for committing perjury as a police officer. But he was alleged to have planted the evidence that may or may not be true. But it was like a rap that Lennon shouldn't have had on him, or Yoko shouldn't have had on her, that they just wanted a high-profile bust. And that happened in 1968, and it turned out that would follow Lennon for years to come and really kind of be the fulcrum that the U.S. government had on him to try to keep him from staying in the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't even doing heroin at this point, I don't think.
No.
So they should have waited if they wanted a real case.
Well, it makes you wonder. Like, I remember hearing in our Black Panther episode that the FBI was not above, like, addicting activists and dissidents with heroin, like turning them on to heroin, and then getting them addicted, and then just, kicking them out of the game like that.
Yeah, I think Lennon never shot heroin. That was his jam.
Okay.
So, early 71, like I said, he was able to enter on a tourist visa. And then when Nixon and his cronies get going on the deportation, the whole thing was based on the fact that he had overstayed his visa. But along with that, it was very valuable to them that he had a drug conviction under his belt at that point.
Yeah.
So they were surveilling him. They were surveilling other artists around the country too, who they thought were subversive and sending messages. Lennon, speaking of getting busted for pot, Lennon very famously wrote a song called John Sinclair in support, and did a tribute, or not tribute, but a concert in, I don't know if they were raising money,
yeah,
or just awareness.
Both.
Okay, for John Sinclair, who was a poet, he was the manager of the MC5, great rock band, and he offered two undercover cops a couple of joints, and he had already had a couple of minor pot offenses, but he went to prison for 10 years for this, and a big refrain in that song, John Sinclair, which is a cool song, and very rootsy and bluesy, not like very Lennon at all, is 10 for 2, 10 for 2, is what they keep saying, 10 years for 2 joints.
Yeah, that he sold to an undercover cop, right?
Yeah, but it worked. He actually was sprung from prison shortly after this concert.
Yeah, like 2 days after. And some people say, I think that indicates he was already going to be sprung, that the Michigan Supreme Court knew this was a trumped-up charge. But other people say, no, the concert surely had some impact. but Sinclair is so the point about Sinclair and John Lennon is John Lennon performed the song. He was the headliner at this concert in Ann Arbor, and he had been coordinating with other people in John Sinclair's orbit that were prominent figures in the New Left. And at this time, in the early 70s, the 60s had ended. It had become clear that flower power hadn't worked. The evil people were still in charge. So what was next? Maybe nonviolent coordination and resistance wasn't the way to go. Now, Lennon and Yoko were dedicated pacifists. They didn't want anything to do with violence. They didn't condone violence. They didn't like violence in any way, shape, or form. But there were elements in the New Left who weren't necessarily convinced that that wasn't the only way to change the course of the United States and get rid of people like Nixon and his cronies. And so if you're watching this from the outside, like your J. Edgar Hoover and Richard Nixon, you're watching the people on the New Left, and you don't know which way they're going to break. Violent, nonviolent, who knows? They were treating all of them with suspicion, and all of a sudden, John Lennon, one of the most recognizable and popular people on the planet, is suddenly hanging out with some of these New Left cats that you don't know which way they're going to go, violent or nonviolent, and that really drew the attention of the FBI to John Lennon. It wasn't necessarily he and Yoko and their pacifist stuff. It was, some people think that it was his involvement with genuine bona fide New Left activists like John Sinclair or like Bobby Seale. Like John Sinclair founded the White Panther Party, which they had a 10-point platform, like the Black Panthers platform, and the first platform in the White Panthers platform is that it's fully in support of the Black Panthers 10-point platform. So he's hanging out with a bunch of people that have proven themselves as dyed-in-the-wool foes of the Nixon administration. That definitely caught the FBI's attention.
Yeah, and they had big plans. They got together, and I think their first meeting was at the Alamuki Township. That's how I'm going to pronounce it.
The Scaramucci Township.
In New Jersey, and initially called themselves the Alamuki Tribe, but wisely changed their name to the Election Year Strategy Information Center. And their plan was in 1972 is to host this, and Lennon gave them money, gave them like $75,000 to kind of get going, and said, here, let's do a bunch of concerts with the help of John Lennon all across the country in 1972. You know, different artists performing, different speakers, you know, like pounding home the anti-war message. And then as these concerts roll closer and closer to the election, it'll culminate in a big protest to the RNC in Miami. This is all very legal stuff. It wasn't, they weren't staging riots or anything. These were just concerts, awareness, trying to keep Nixon from winning. And Nixon got worried, and he knew that, like you said, the influence that someone like John Lennon could have was, like, he didn't have anyone on his side. There was no Scott Baio at the time wooing the youngsters.
Bob Blah Blah?
To the right. Oh, he was Bob Blah Blah, wasn't he? That's funny. So this is all going on, and this is kind of what ramps up the pressure to get Lennon out of there. This custody battle's going on. They know about that. And so their first step was to instruct immigration and naturalization to try and say, hey, you've overstayed your visa. You got to get out of here. And Lennon knew this was coming. This is no secret. He had gone on TV shows talking about being followed by the FBI, having his phone tapped, which we still aren't sure if that really happened. I think it says officially that there was no legal phone tapping in the FBI documents, but that throwing that word legal in there just kind of makes you think like, well, were there any illegal ones that you're not going to tell us about?
Yeah, I read an interview. So this is like the depths of my depravity. I didn't even listen to the interview. I read a Fresh Air interview with John Weiner about this, and he said that in the FBI responded and said they found no evidence of illegal wiretapping by the FBI, or no, legal wiretapping by the FBI. So Weiner's like, okay, does that mean they were doing illegal wiretapping, or does it mean that they didn't look very hard for evidence? It doesn't mean that they weren't tapping his phone, is what he's saying.
Right. It at least made Lennon paranoid enough
Yeah.
Like he wasn't not sweating this. This made him very paranoid, and with good reason. But he took to going next door at the Dakota building, so he would let Lennon use his phone in his apartment to make phone calls, and I guess assist with the calls at the same time a little bit. And then the FBI said, you know what could really help is if we could bust them currently for narcotics in the United States. If we have an active drug charge against them, and Hoover sent it out himself. He said, quote, for info on a bureau, NYCPD Narcotics Division is aware of the subject's recent use of narcotics, which is like every day, and are attempting to obtain enough info to arrest both subject and wife Yoko based on PD investigation.
Yeah, and by this time I'm thinking he was using heroin. I think that's what they were referencing as his recent use.
Oh, really? I didn't think that started until later.
I thought it was the early 70s.
I thought it happened during his lost weekend, but I may be wrong on that. I'm not that far along.
I'm going to err toward you then, because I'm just surmising here. I'm not the one who has a big old book of Beatles history. So, I don't know. They never actually busted him, right? This was all just like they were planning on doing this, but they never needed to.
I don't think he was arrested in the United States, was he?
Yeah, I didn't know. I didn't get that impression, but it seemed like everything was kind of barreling toward that, and even like you were saying, the FBI was like, we'd let the NYPD know to go do this. So, and if you take a step back, like, this is some heat, this is some pressure that they're putting on John and Yoko. They're basically saying, we're going to split you guys up by deporting John, because we know that Yoko's not going to leave the country because of this custody battle. She can't afford to, so she has to stay here. So if we threaten deportation to John Lennon, it might actually keep him in line. And the FBI used the word neutralized, that they were seeking to neutralize Lennon. And I guess some people who don't think very deeply into the story are like, hey, we're going to assassinate John Lennon. And John Weiner has pointed out, like, that's not at all what they meant. They meant, like, basically making him ineffective, like taking him out of the game, basically, one way or another. But not killing him, just convincing him through putting this undue, unfair, undemocratic pressure on him to drop his activities with the New Left.
Yeah, and by the way, I think he probably was using heroin in the late 60s and had it on again, off again. But either way,
so that makes sense, because I did see that guys like Jerry Rubin and I think Rennie Davis, a couple of like the Chicago 7, like they didn't even like hang out with him because he was doing too many drugs. And I'm guessing that it wasn't like he was smoking so much pot we can't even talk with him anymore. Like I think he was shooting dope and they weren't.
Yeah, well, he never shot it. He always smoked it.
Or smoking dope.
But I think he and Yoko were doing heroin actually before the Beatles broke up in the end.
Okay.
When they were sort of estranged, with the Beatles, not John and Yoko. But at any rate, like I said, these investigations are going on, and they're going to his concerts, and they're not even sending back information that really means much. They're even saying some of these informants,
I literally got another staff.
You know what? They're not even really down with, like, the New Left isn't even down with them because they think they're just, quote, self-aggrandizing rock stars.
Yeah.
Or there's little chance they'll accomplish anything because they spend all their time doing drugs.
Mine's better.
They're kind of sending the message like, you really don't need to worry so much about John Lennon. He's not much of a threat.
Yeah.
Kind of one of the funny things about this investigation was...
Either way, that's $10K in my pocket.
And Lennon was one of the most famous people in the world, one of the most recognizable faces in the world on planet Earth, along with Yoko Ono.
Mm-hmm.
And the FBI passes around a sheet with Lennon's picture on it so they can recognize him. But it was the wrong photo. It was of a different human being. It wasn't even John Lennon.
Yeah, it was a street busker from the West Village named David Peel.
So funny.
Who had a record that I guess John Lennon helped produce or something. He looked vaguely like John Lennon, but that was the picture that the FBI passed around to the cops of the wrong guy. The FBI also put out an all points bulletin searching for John Lennon and said that he's at the St. Regis at 150 Bank Street.
St. Regis Landscape Supply?
That's right. I guess that's what they meant, because the St. Regis Hotel is on Central Park. And John Lennon was indeed living on Bank Street at the time, but he was at 105 Bank Street. So that all points bulletin was all kinds of wrong. But this is the level of like coppery that the FBI was conducting, trying to get John Lennon.
All right, well, let's take a break, and we'll come back and talk a little bit about Lennon's official defense right after this.
We're live with Santa Claus ahead of the Mercedes-Benz winter event. How can you deliver so many gifts in one night? Holiday magic, and the winter event helps too. I've seen a lot of Mercedes-Benz on people's lists. They sure are making some magic over at their workshop. Would you sign my daughter's stocking? Sure. What's her name? Oh, just make it out to 10. The Mercedes-Benz winter event is back with great offers on the enhanced GLA, the sporty C-Class, and the aerodynamically designed GLE. Lease the 2021 GLA 250 SUV for just $379 a month for 36 months with $3,843 due inside. Hurry into the Mercedes-Benz winter event today. Mercedes-Benz.
Monthly lease payment is available only to qualified customers exclusively through Mercedes-Benz Financial Services. Participating dealers through January 4th, 2021. This offer excludes formatic models and optional equipment described. Only under April 48736 for details about costs and terms.
What's up, everybody? It's Jill Scott, and here's one of my favorite moments from J. Bill, the podcast. Brought to you by Netflix new film, My Rainey's Black Bottom. And that powerfully strong presence of Ma Rainey. That looms over the whole thing. That looms over everything.
It's almost unbelievable that she had such she was so free. You know what I mean? Like the way that she spoke to those white men who, ran her record label and what she refused to do, and the way that she understood it, how she understood that she was a tool and all they wanted was her voice. And she was going to make sure she got everything that she wanted because they was going to get everything they wanted.
That's right. Listen to a new episode of J. Bill, the podcast, every Wednesday, and check out Ma Rainey's Black Bottom in select theaters now and on Netflix December 18th. This film is rated R, under 17, not admitted without a parent.
All right, so John Lennon is not going to take this lying down. He was paranoid. He was going on like the Mike Douglas show and talking about the FBI coming after him. First thing he did was probably what any really, really rich person would do, is he hires a top-rate bulldog attorney to try and defend this, or at least delay this. This guy's name was Leon Wilds, and he really did delay this. He was sort of a master at filing these motions and getting it extended, and Lennon was able to stay in the country longer and longer and longer. But he was also kind of instrumental in kind of letting Lennon know that this was a real situation that he was involved in.
Right. The thing is if you are a immigration prosecutor for the federal government of the United States, you know that there is not a ton of resources allocated to your division, right? Or traditionally there hasn't been. And so, customarily, the Justice Department has, or I guess INS, has left it up to each prosecutor to determine how hard they want to prosecute the case. And so, if you are a upstanding person who's never posed any sort of threat to the United States, and maybe you own a business or you're a productive member of society, there is a chance that the INS is going to look the other way and not actually deport you, even if you are here illegally. You've overstayed your visa or you came into the country illegally, who knows? And that's actually where the DREAMER program came from, DACA. It basically said, like, these particular immigrants were brought here as children, and they pose no threat. Most of them are going to college or college-bound, or they're in the military, so we're going to not deport them. And what Lennon's lawyer told him was like, all of this is true, and yet they're putting the heat on you like I have never seen. This is clearly coming down from on high. Like, they want to get you out of the United States, and it's not just this prosecutor.
Yeah, and the other thing that happens when it comes to a case like this is they have to weigh, or they can be decided basically on the value that an immigrant might bring to the U.S. by being an American or living in the United States. And so there was, it's kind of funny to look back now and think that there had to be a case made that John Lennon brings any kind of value. But they did, and there was a series of letters written by Bob Dylan and Joan Baez and Joyce Carol Oates, Leonard Bernstein, John Updike, just a series of very famous artists kind of arguing in favor of John Lennon being allowed to live here. It was sort of a flood of public outcry, like what little was known back then at least. Like you can't there's tremendous value to letting John Lennon stay in this country.
Right, and don't forget John Cage wrote a letter too. And I'm sure it was kind of like, well, do you want me to write a letter for you, John? He's like, yeah, sure. I'm sure that would help a lot, John Cage. Because I'm sure no one in the Nixon administration's ever heard of you.
Yeah, probably so.
So, the one kind of the upshot, I'm just going full on using this word now. The upshot of that letter writing campaign was not even just so much to demonstrate the value of John Lennon remaining in the United States. It was, if you kick him out, like there's going to be a public outcry, and you're going to be held to account and asked to explain why you guys kicked him out. So it did have a bit of that combined with his attorney's tenacity. It kept John Lennon in the country. He was actually never deported, even though he lived for I think 2 or 3 years with you have 60 days to leave the country order, and his lawyer kept getting it extended and extended and extended. But for 3 years, that was the threat that he was living under. And again, he was deported. He would leave without his wife, who had to stay in the country for her own custody battle. So that was a lot of strain on him, actually. And the worst part about this whole thing is not that the FBI did this and that the Nixon administration singled him out, or that it all came down to Strom Thurmond writing this memo to kick things off. It was that it worked. Like, they sought to neutralize John Lennon and his political activism, and he stopped. He actually did. He gave